Thank you.
Thank
you.
Okay.
Just need to make like some. At least this one doesn't have this nice.
Okay. Hopefully we've adjusted the mics and hopefully you don't have to lean into the mic in order to be heard. I will call the Southbury Board of Selectmen regular meeting Thursday, October 18th to order at 7 p.m. If we could have the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First up is a presentation for Pierce Hollow Village. If you could come forward. Oh, Lainey? Is that working?
No. Oh, you got to turn the mic on.
Right. Thank you, Cindy.
Hi, my name's Lainey Jedlinski. I live at 22E Heritage Crest in Southbury. I've been a resident of Southbury for 42 years. I'm representing the Pierce Hollow Village Board of Directors. We are coming before you today to ask that the town of Southbury accept the offer from the state of Connecticut for the 45 acres on Southbury Training School property formerly known as Personnel Village. I know that you have all seen the letter that the board sent to you. However, I will read it so that it gets into the minutes, and you know it's brief. The mission of Pierce Hollow Village is to develop and manage affordable senior housing services serving the greater Southbury area in order to meet the demand for quality, safe residential apartments. The Pierce Hollow Village Board of Directors is functioning as the developer of this affordable elderly housing complex. The board is comprised of the same dedicated volunteers who serve on the board of directors of Southbury Elderly Housing and Pop Rock Senior Housing, the two affordable senior housing complexes in Southbury, known as Grace Meadows. Grace Meadows is always fully occupied. Currently, there are over 300 applicants on the waiting lists for 88 units. So this represents about a 4-year waiting period, which is about the norm. Furthermore, approximately 75% of the residents of Grace Meadows, the new applicants, are coming from the Southbury community, either having lived in Southbury, have relatives in town, or worked here. Pierce Hollow Village Board has become aware that federal HUD funding will become available later this year for low-income housing. This is the first time in approximately 6 years that this type of funding will be available. Pierce Hollow Village intends to submit an application for funding as soon as we are able to do so, meaning as soon as the application is available. But a key prerequisite is obtaining such funding is to have the site control of the land. So Pierce Hollow Village is requesting that the town of Southbury take title to the subject land from the state. This will give Pierce Hollow Village the needed site control. Advantages to the town of Southbury as we see them are that Pierce Hollow Village project will be consistent with the state of Connecticut's affordable housing statute. It is our understanding that Southbury is currently significantly below the state's target of 10% affordable housing. Further, a market study commissioned by Pierce Hollow Village indicated that there was a current unmet need in Southbury for approximately 290 more affordable senior housing units, and that need is continuously growing. Southbury has the highest percentage of elderly residents of any town in the state of Connecticut. I don't think that's news to you. This project will help to provide much-needed housing to that population. Southbury acquires at no minimal cost if Southbury acquires this land at no minimal cost, the approximate value is $3 million for the parcel of land that is currently owned by the state. This parcel could ultimately accommodate up to 180 units of affordable housing. It is expected that the application to HUD will be for between 40 and 60 units, which will be manageable level for the first phase and will be conducive to receiving the funding. Utilization of this land for this project will prevent the possibility of the land being sold by the state to a developer for other housing purposes. Pierce Hollow Village has been advised by our professional advisors that HUD funds will be officially announced in the next month or two. At that time, specific timelines will be announced and application forms will be available for completion. Although not definite yet, we are working under the assumption that the application will be submitted in November of 2018. Of course, there is no guarantee that Pierce Hollow Village will be successful in obtaining a portion of the available funds. But the closer we are to the front of the process, the better our chances. One advantage, a big advantage, we will have over at least some of the applicants is that we already have the land earmarked for this project. But as stated above, having site control is critical to the success of the application. Of course, we are hopeful of being successful the first time, but we have been told by our advisors that the availability of HUD funding will be a multi-year event now. So if we're unsuccessful the first year, it would be our intent to try again the next year and subsequent years as needed. Environmental testing, recognizing that there are environmental issues on the property that will need to be remediated. Pierce Hollow Village recently engaged a professional firm to perform the required tests, including soil samples, testing for oil leaks, and testing for asbestos. We have received very positive results from the testing. No oil leaks have been detected, and soil samples have detected no evidence of hazardous materials, or if there have been, they're well below the government thresholds. The existing buildings, which will be demolished eventually, did test positive for asbestos, which was already known to us, but lead levels are well below the government allowable limit. Additionally, testing will have to be performed at some point, but at this stage, it appears that only remedial actions that will have to occur as part of Pierce Hollow Village project will be the removal of the oil tanks and appropriate removal and disposal of the building materials that contain asbestos. It must be emphasized that it is Pierce Hollow Village's intent to pay for all remedial costs out of the HUD funding if and when we are successful in our application. Once the town takes title to the land, then general liability coverage will be prudent. Once Pierce Hollow Village has additional funding, then this cost will be presumably be covered by PHV, Pierce Hollow Village. But until additional funding is received, then it is hoped that this parcel of land can be included in the town's existing coverage for town-owned properties. We have a long outline attached to this letter of the history of what we've been through and what we have achieved to date. things that we have been through and we have achieved are the environmental impact evaluation and the initial survey, which were paid for to the tune of almost $40,000 by the town. We have done wetlands survey. We have had a market study. We have had the zoning for the land changed and the language within the zoning regulations changed so that it is appropriate for senior housing. There is so much more that's listed on that list of things that we have accomplished. I read it earlier today and I said, wow, we did a lot. I can't think of any more right now. We've raised over approximately $100,000 to pay for all of the things that have needed to be done. And we are raising more money as we speak. At this time, before you ask questions, I would like to introduce Representative Arthur O'Neill, who has further information that I just heard this evening.
Arthur?
I'm Arthur O'Neill. I'm State Representative for Southbury. And I have had some conversations with people at OPM and otherwise trying to track down the answer to a question which I'm assuming is going to be in the minds of the members of the Board of Selectmen who have asked to do so by Laney. And that is what happens, and we're talking about a third degree of hypothetical question here. What happens if the town takes title to the property, the housing effort fails because of lack of funding or for whatever other reason, and the town then decides it wants to return the property to the state of Connecticut? Does the town have the ability to do so? Does the state have to take it back? And what happens at that point in time? Now, it is a bit speculative. Now, we're a couple of steps, 3 steps, I think, from where we are right now. But the answer I got from a fellow at OPM who's in charge of this was that the reverter clause, which is called for in the statute, would be automatic, which means that if the town stopped using it or didn't use it for housing for senior citizens, it would revert immediately to the state of Connecticut. The question then is, usually or frequently, a reverter clause is triggered when you do something. For example, if you used it for some other purpose, if you did something that was contrary. Here, it would be the failure to act or the failure to fulfill the housing objectives for senior housing. And how would that be determined? At what point in time would you recognize that that failure has occurred? Months of years have gone by since the land was originally set up for the conveyance, and months, perhaps a year or two, would go by even if everything were successful before senior housing were built. So at what point does one say it has not gotten to it's failed, it's not going to happen? And what he indicated to me was, subject to getting a review by the Attorney General's office, he thought that a letter from the town, probably from the Board of Selectmen, declaring that they had given up on trying to do senior housing would be sufficient for HUD to accept, or HUD, for OPM to accept that the town was not going to use it for senior housing, and therefore the reversion, or the reverter clause, would kick in. So, as I said, this is somewhat speculative because we're talking 3 steps down the road of what happens if, what happens if, what happens if. And finally, of course, we've had recent experience where state agencies seem to be going in one direction, and then all of a sudden change of mind occurs, and clearly there's going to be a change of administration. There may be changes of personnel at OPM, and so we don't know for sure what would happen 2 to 3 years from now if all of those hypotheticals were to come to pass. But that's the best information that I have at this point. I will say, during the course of the conversation, the individual I was talking to said, you know, we've been kind of wondering, because it's been a while since this bill passed, originally in 2015 or 13 even. So it's been a while since this has been out there. We're wondering, you know, when is something going to happen on this? And the comment he made was, because if you're not going to do anything with it, we might as well just start looking to decide what we want to do with that parcel of land if the town isn't really ever going to use it. So it's not exactly right in the front and center of their radar scopes, but it's not off their radar completely. It's something that has been apparently under some consideration. So I think that should be borne in mind as well. They haven't said or done much of anything, but it's not like they've completely forgotten about this until I called them up.
Is it possible to get that commitment in writing from someone with the state?
I can try. I think that once you start asking for written commitments, it's going to be a much longer process probably to get something from them. And especially since he has to check in with the AG's office. Anyone who's ever dealt with the Attorney General's office knows that can be a long time before they respond.
And then
I doubt they'd be willing to do anything like that until after whatever change in administration is going to be there. Go ahead.
because then the other issue too, if the town takes it, and this came up, we looked at this like a year ago, and there were various concerns raised with taking it and holding it, and liability issues, environmental issues and whatnot. If the town takes it and there's environmental conditions and the town doesn't have intention to remediate the conditions, and then we determine that we're not going to use it for senior housing and it has to revert back, would the state then take it still, since it's transferred it to us and it has those environmental issues? And is that part of like their thought process when they're saying that the reverter clause would work, or would they be expecting us to do something before it reverting back?
I raised the issue and I did not get a response to the effect of, well, of course we would the town would have to clean up any environmental conditions even if they were existing at the time that the transfer occurred. But I'm not sure that they've done all of the thinking necessary to think about where they'd want to be 2 years and this many steps that are essentially at this moment hypothetical. So I think that really is an issue that certainly I raised it, and I think they're aware of the fact that when a reverter kicks in, the property comes back to the state, it comes back in whatever condition it's in. Now the town, unlike somebody else perhaps, is an existence. It's a corporate entity that's not going to go out of existence, and it's got assets, and so you can always try to recover something. If they were trying to get something back from some corporation that was just declared bankruptcy and then the property reverted, they'd be sort of stuck trying to do it. So it's a little different from perhaps other experiences they may have had. So if they're thinking in terms of trying to make any kind of arrangement, they're not saying that to me right now. I mean, that was not a part of the conversation really, that what happens if it comes back. It wasn't say, well, we've got to check it out and do a study and a survey and that sort of thing.
So, I mean, I looked through, as you guys were all talking, I looked through some of our old notes and minutes. I mean, Laney was last year, I think it was based on, if I'm reading right, February of 2017, where the original request was made, I think, that we would accept the conveyance of the 45 acres. And then 2 years ago today, actually, was when we reviewed the letter requesting that the state reconsider the loan, the pre-development loan application. So one, I admire your persistence, Laney, and everyone in the group for sticking with it. I think what I still would like to know a little more of are some of the ramifications, and get a little more clarity from the state on the reverter clause, and what would be really required. I think having something in writing, certainly, both from Pierce Hollow Village folks in terms of their responsibilities, as well as what the state would require from us, if there are any requirements in terms of it reverting back, would be interested. But in theory, I think when we talked about this back then, there was pretty decent consensus amongst us that we would support something like this. So.
Excuse me. First of all, I don't know that the state knows that the property needs remediation. Mm-hmm. We know it, and Jack is going to give you the summary report that we received from the environmental testing. I would like you, Jack, do you want to hand those out? And then he's going to answer the questions. But I would like you to take special note of the pages with the lists of things that were tested that were not there. The only thing that was there was asbestos. Now that takes all of the pesticides, all of the PCBs, all of the unknowns that we're all afraid of off the table.
I think the asbestos is the shakes on the sides of the building, is that
That's,
right?
and the
Flooring as well?
flooring,
Yeah.
yeah.
Laney,
Yeah. I
you said
lived in a house that had
a
that
month to 2 months
for years.
until the funding, the HUD funding may become available.
No, when we get the when
the
they
application-
announce that the HUD funding is going to be available.
That's what I mean.
And the application's available to us.
Okay, do you know how long after you submit your application that it would take for them to give a commitment to you? Are we
Good
talking
chance maybe you could swing that
a year?
around.
Are we
We're
talking?
talking months.
We know that.
Historically,
Okay, yeah,
who knows what it is now? But historically, there's a window
do that.
for
Thanks.
putting in your application, which is fairly short from prehistorically, like 10 weeks.
okay.
And then it's 10 weeks of consideration, and then they let you know. So, I mean, this is, maybe it'll be 6 months, but that is not what I've been led to believe. And I'm telling you what I've been told.
Right, well, you know more
But
than me.
that's,
When you talk about site control, and maybe you've talked to your advisors or whatnot, would it be possible for like a trigger mechanism? Like, the Board of Selectmen passes a resolution that upon the granting of funding from HUD, we notify the state and take possession of the property. So that there's an official, motion out there, there's an official act saying we're going to do this upon the happening of some event.
that was not among the hypotheticals we put out to the people who were telling us about this HUD funding. What was said, Jack, that I heard was you do not have to physically have the land in your hand. However, it has to be in the process, not 3 steps away, not 6 steps away, not pending a mortgage, not.
Right.
It has to be in the works. And the one thing that I see that would make it, if the town was acting said to the state, that we want the property. Well, that's going to take a little while. And then we have to be working on a lease. So that's 2 steps already. I don't know, and I can ask the people that we're getting our advice from, but my impression is the cleaner the flow, the more likely we are to be considered.
So, I guess I'd be interested in knowing whether something contingent like that would be possible. And as far as a lease, that could be negotiated and agreed to in advance as well, subject to assuming title. I guess a question for Arthur might be what the next step is with the state. Like, how many steps are there in the process for us to acquire title? I haven't read that public act in a while.
The secretary of OPM, or his designee inside the agency, has to review the report that's been put together regarding the site, the conditions on the site. And then he basically, or she, would have to sign off and agree to allow the transaction to go forward. Then that would communicate to, I believe it's the treasurer, and the attorney general then has to draft the deed. And I've seen that process take months, depending, how much urgency there is, who's really, if the governor is demanding it because he wants to hold a press conference, announcing something, I'm sure it gets moved a lot more quickly than if it's just, in a sense, seen as routine business. But it's not unusual for that process for the attorney generals to take months to prepare a deed to do the conveyance. So It's got, in itself, inside the state, there are mechanisms that have to work before the deed actually appears and is available to be handed over to be recorded. So it's, you know, you can never guarantee how long it's gonna take. It's not a clear-cut timetable, but you're talking about, I would say, months from the time that the secretary signs off, which in and of itself could be a period of time, and especially right now, because in a few weeks, we're probably gonna start seeing people departing from state government who would be the people who would have to sign off on this stuff. And then new people coming in, and it's possible that an acting secretary of OPM could sign this document, but it's equally likely that someone is going to say, no, I wanna let the new guy coming in, this is an important transaction, involves a piece of land worth $3 or $4 million, so I'm not going to just, you know, pass it on. You know, I'm gonna let the next guy take care of it. That wouldn't surprise me at all, since this is something fairly significant. So it could be several months. It could be before the state would actually produce a deed.
I also think there needs to be a letter from my office saying we intend to move forward with this. We've been waiting for that. At any point until the transaction is actually taking place, it's just like any other real estate transaction, it can, if we don't go to the signing of the deed, it doesn't transact. So I'm not sure how that works with this operation. If we were to say, okay, we're going to proceed, start it in the motion, and see if the money comes through because we're starting the process. I'm not sure how that works.
I haven't looked at, the last time I looked at the statute was a few weeks ago. I didn't look at it coming in here tonight. My recollection is that once the town says we want it, and I believe that's the letter that comes from the first selectman's office, all of the other things, the other steps, are really being taken by the state before it finally transfers. So, and I'm guessing, but I'm not absolutely sure, that if 2 months after that letter saying we want it goes in, the town says we don't want it, then that would stop the machinery at that point. I mean, I don't think they're trying to get rid of this land because they see it as a huge liability to the state. So it's not like they're eager to get rid of it. But on the other hand, they would like something, I think, to be done with it in the relatively short term. That was sort of what was conveyed to me. And that that they're willing to, in effect, wait, but not forever, before the town takes action on this thing. And they're working, they want to work with the town. They're not, you know, acting, you know, in a preemptory or totally uncooperative sort of way, just trying to do it. I get the impression that from my conversations that they're willing to work with the town. So I suppose if the town were to change its mind, there would be a substantial willingness to try to stop the transaction. And it seems like it's generally easier to stop things in state government to actually make them happen. That's been my experience.
Do we have any ballpark on what the remediation is going to cost?
We have a ballpark. The remediation would be taken care of by the HUD and other funding that we would be getting from the very beginning. What we have said to the selectmen over the last 5 years is that the selectmen, the town, has put forward the monies necessary, the monies that we expected, and that Pierce Hollow Village and its funding would take care of the remediation.
But do we have any, I think the question was, do we have any idea how much that would be?
In the ballpark of $500,000.
Is there any scenario in which the town would have to pay that money at all? I mean, I'm hearing not, but is it any remote scenario that maybe we end up having to cover that cost?
Oh, I'm sure we could come up with a scenario that would require that, but if in fact the town took the town accepted the property. And Pierce Hollow Village said, we're out of here. And the town said, we need this senior housing. Then you would decide how you want to move forward with it. I can't come up with
I don't think the town's in the
a...
business of building senior housing, but yeah, I can see that
Well,
happening.
that's how Grace Meadows came into effect, is that the town did not want to go into the housing business. So, you know, a nonprofit was formed and started building Grace Meadows.
And that's the model you
And I think
use, right?
that's somewhat to Selectman Bucksbaum's point, when we started this part of the conversation, that what-if scenario, if the reverter clause required that the land be remediated before it reverts back, and Pierce Hollow has, for whatever reason, not been able to come up with the funding or gone insolvent, whatever it may be, that could potentially put the town in a liability situation in terms of the risk of that funding. So I think we need that information. Because even if there was an agreement, even if there was a formal letter of agreement with Pierce Hollow, if Pierce Hollow, for whatever reason, and went insolvent before the remediation took place, and the reverter clause required, the state required that before it reverted back to them, because we weren't going to be using it for the stated purpose, that could be an issue. I mean, that would certainly be.
Is that a question for maybe Jeff Tinley to give us some advice on?
He happens to be in the audience.
I
Well,
did
think
see
we're
We're not gonna ask him
complicated.
for that advice.
Yeah.
he was sleeping over
I
there.
don't
but
think he's prepared.
It's
to.
late now.
I think we should ask him for that advice, but not
Right.
to come up with it
Exactly.
this moment.
Yeah, I'm not asking for,
I'd just like to follow up on my question by saying that, obviously, best case scenario would have been finding nothing.
Right.
But this is second best case scenario. No leaking oil tanks, that is a huge question mark, that is closed in this case. And, putting 30 houses into asbestos dumpsters for $500,000, probably less than that, is a small number when you consider the potential of this property. Where else in town do you have sewer, water, and natural gas?
Agreed.
And no neighbors?
Yep.
There's no neighbors to object.
it's a nice piece of land.
Yeah.
If for some reason Pierce Hollow went away, the town should try to facilitate somebody else putting affordable housing on this site.
Mm-hmm.
It is the perfect site. And I think that we should keep that in mind. I think 500,000 sounds really terrible, but
What the
in
opportunity
the
is.
larger scope of things, it's pretty minor in my estimation.
So,
Yeah,
go ahead, Jason.
No, to that point, I mean, we may decide to still do it even if the answers are not satisfactory, but I think we should figure out what,
It'd be
what,
nice
if
to-
any, exposure the town may have in that regard.
I totally agree, but we should keep
Oh, yeah.
looking at it through a lens of this is very positive at the end of the day.
Okay,
If you have environmental issues, this is the man to talk to. Jack Muscolino is one of our...
Hi, Jack Muscolino. I'm at 128 Knott Hill Road here in Southbury. Been a resident for 33 years. I'm here to answer any of your questions on the testing that we did.
I don't think we have a question on the testing. I think at this point, we're looking, the town's looking for a recommendation. There's been a few questions asked here.
For potential exposure.
Potential exposure. I think what I'd like, if it's okay with the board, I'd like to have Jason work with Pierce Hollow Village and with the questions to our town attorney to get an opinion on some of this matter, and then at the next board meeting, we can make a decision. Is that?
Yeah, that's fine. So you're looking for me to interface with them and Jeff Tinley to
Yes.
come up with an analysis on those subjects?
Right. I mean, we're sitting here saying, I'm looking at this saying, to Justin's point, yeah, $500,000, if that's a number, and we hope they can come there, and if we get it, and we say, okay, we can't do this, and it has to go back to the state, obviously, we don't want to remediate until we we don't, you don't want to put that money in there until you have that money coming in. And if it goes back to state, are they going to say, well, we're not going to take it back until you remediate it? Well, at that point, I'm thinking we have something.
We go to court.
Right, and we say, okay, we're going to remediate it, but we're not, it's up for municipal use at that time, and we'll, if we had, whatever we have to do. But I think that's a little more involved than we can get here tonight. So, Jason, if you will work with Pierce Hollow Village and.
I'll talk to them, and then I'll talk to Jeff
Great.
early next week.
All
I
right.
think.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
To have it back by the first meeting of November,
We're hoping, yeah.
if possible,
if
Jason?
possible. I think it will work. Okay? Next is the presentation by Leaps of Faith. So Leaps of Faith is here. Go ahead. You're making a presentation on what you might propose that the town do.
Correct. My name's Steve Dunkel. I'm on the board of Leaps in Faith and also run a veteran services organization.
And I'm Bob DeWern, I'm also on the board of directors for Leaps of Faith.
What we wanted to do is pretty much just walk through the proposals. Everybody had a chance to read the
We've read the proposal, so you don't have to go back through it.
Okay. That makes it easy.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think for the sake of some of those in the audience, just the highlights would be worthwhile.
Yeah, as you all saw, that we came up with 3 different phases. One is an initial phase where it's basically just cleanup, removing debris, mowing, filling the pits in the grass area, removing the trash, install a dock. This time of year, that's probably not feasible, but clear along the driveway, cut down the additional trees, et cetera. Under that, we would bear all the expenses. That's what's anticipated. And what we would ask that the town provide a truck or something for us to throw the debris into and then just cart it off to take it wherever. And that's really the initial phase. While that phase is going on, the second phase is where we get into getting the estimates for the driveway, the access, the egress, and all that. To get to that phase, that's obviously going to require our raising dollars. Right now, we've got the public sector with you all involved, us as a nonprofit, and so the goal will be to reach out to the private sector to bring the businesses, the community, and other private sector organizations, particularly those that have a heart for those with disabilities, adaptive skiing, and also vets. So of course, he's got a huge veteran initiative that goes on to reach out to people like that. Also, we've done some research on grants. There are grants available. Foundations like the Christopher Reeve Foundation. This is right in their wheelhouse. So to reach out to organizations like that to help raise the dollars, the 200,000 plus, to do the driveway, get the estimates, et cetera. In order to move to that phase, what we're suggesting is a short-term lease of the land, if you will, permit for the land for 1 to 2 years, so that as you go out and raise funds, as you know, you've got to be able to say, this is what it's going for. You can't say, well, if we get it, we're going to go look for a place. So we need something to evidence the fact that we've got something in place. If we can raise the funds, then we move forward in stages with it. So as the funds come in, we're not just sitting on it, we're actually putting the funds to use in stages, in incremental stages. And then we can get into I won't get into what all the estimates are in terms of the driveway and the grading, create an S shape and parking areas and things like that. Obviously, the parking area up top is not sufficient to any degree. The egress has got to be greatly expanded so you can see both ways. Maybe talk to the state about putting in a blinking yellow light or something to create some awareness of what's there. But that's all part of phase 2. Phase 1 is just the general cleanup. And then phase 3 is, do some things that are more town-centric, if you will, putting in swing sets, sandbox, whatever it may be, to make it more town-friendly. look at it from the standpoint of economic development. If this area is cleaned up and put to use, and the town's got use of it, then that becomes, as somebody mentioned on the first, when driving into town, it's one of the first things you see. So make it attractive, but do it in coordination with the town. Run events there with the town and the local businesses, so it becomes a destination versus an eyesore, if you will. So it doesn't sit there idly. Get member businesses, the community, actually using it. Use it to raise events. And there's some examples of different events that, ideas we came up with for potential use.
Okay. Any questions of this presentation?
Comments?
Okay.
First, thank you for coming in. I'm glad we were,
Sure.
after a busy September and early October that we had.
Well, thank you all for-
I'm glad we were able to get you on the agenda, and appreciate the patience. And I think now's a good time with the summer season, certainly officially over based on the weather today, to really start talking about this. I work for a community foundation, so I'm a big believer in tri-sector partnerships of public, private, and nonprofit sector. And I think for an opportunity like this, it's really the only way that something like this is going to get done. And I think we all know there had been funding at one point to do a project at River Road Park that ended up getting,
Nice basketball.
a beautiful, tremendous, improvement to Community House, and I think a good investment by the town. I look back, and I know we're talking a little bit later about the strategic plan, but if you look at the strategic plan, the number two thing respondents were in favor of focusing when you did the survey was access to public waterfront lake recreation, 55.4%. And when we look at the strategic focus of the goal of improving quality of life, pursue access to and participation in lakefront recreation. So I think we have an opportunity in front of us that specifically aligns with a strategic plan that so many volunteers in this town, Selectwoman Naylor among them and part of the leadership of, have stated they want, and to improve the quality of life. So I'd have a recommendation for consideration amongst the board. The Parks and Rec Commission has done a lot of work on this as well. Came to us sometime last year probably, I think, maybe before that, with a proposal, took out some old plans, took out the old blueprint plans. I'd like a partnership of LOF, members of the Parks and Recreation Commission, including Dustin, certainly as our director. I'd volunteer to be a liaison to that, based on I'm already a liaison to the commission. But also, I really believe in this as the opportunity. I don't know if exactly anything in here ends up being the final solution, but I think there are elements of an opportunity here that would cost the town very little, if anything, that could provide us with opportunities to pursue grant funding, both jointly with them. I think an organization like the Connecticut Community Foundation would love this. I think Sikorsky's Foundation would certainly be interested in this. But I'd like to propose that we begin working in partnership and with the leadership of the Parks and Recreation Commission to explore how we take this from paper to a true action plan. I think it responds to the strategic plan. We've heard from a lot of residents over time there. I think there's a lot of issues. We need to look at, if we go through a phased approach, what are the insurance liabilities still of just having this? You can't truly put a lock on a fence that's going to keep everybody out. We know that. But so I think there are still a lot of issues to work through. But I think we have a starting point here to come to a solution. Whether or not that solution can happen by, Memorial Day of next year, when, it's I don't know. But I think that should be our goal in this phased approach. So I am fully in favor of us figuring out a way to pursue and explore this proposal. It's an investment of time at this point.
Anybody else? I think that we need to, we can certainly start talking about it and looking into it. My concerns are the cost to the town, recurring costs, liabilities, funding in our budget for for building, as we talked about that park, we talked about what that would cost and a long time ago, and where would the money come from, and the money that we had from a long time ago. Responsibilities, so we can start that process. I can assure you it's not going to be quick. It's just, there's a lot here to digest. And of course, the Board of Finance will have to be aware of any cost associated with this. And I don't mean just the initial phase, what the final phase, if that's what you're going to do, they're going to look at that and back it up. Say, what kind of expenses and stuff, and where that money would be coming from and how it would get there, and what our recurring liability. So I've actually I reached out to the health department today for some other things, but I also asked them to find out, my understanding is the blue-green algae was a big problem this summer in Lake Zor. They closed down Jackson's Cove and Kettletown. And in prior years, there was a lot of bacteria levels down there. They shut down swimming. So he's going to get back to me with that. And I also asked.
I think they're still closed, right? I mean, they were closed back. Blue-green algae is still closing these places, right?
It's getting worse.
Yeah.
So the other thing I asked is that Dustin give me an analysis or a report. I think we'll have that at the second November meeting. I asked him to put together a report to the board, what he thinks his cost, what he would think it would take to staff and operate this on his level. And there's going to be more input going to be needed for that.
Was this proposal shared with Parks and Rec?
No.
Okay, because I think certainly they.
Well, I saw it, so I want
Yeah.
our department head to
100%.
do that. So, and then we'll refer, I've sent it to Jeff Tinley. He's been working on some other things for some of his input on the proposal. So we can have Mike, you're the Park and Rec liaison.
Yeah, they meet next Thursday.
So we'll get more, that's fine, and Dustin's been asked to give that. So we'll start the consideration on this and see where it leads.
I just had a clarifying question. So Dustin's going to look at recurring costs of, if this was all done, what the cost of the town is. In the proposal, the spreadsheet, all the numbers in there, there's a couple places that say to be determined, so I'm not talking about those. Are all of the amounts in here proposed to be covered by LOF or through grants that LOF gets or through funding that LOF receives?
That's our intent.
That's the intent.
So you're not looking at the town to have any startup costs?
No.
I think there were some small costs in there that they were expecting the town to assume.
That's like a truck.
The dumpster.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot.
Right, I mean, there was some,
Yeah, but there are long-term considerations as if this went to the full plan. In terms of staff time to maintain the park, for Public Works I saw John here, for staff time to maintain the parks, for continued upkeep. What else is the development of it beyond just the dock over time? So I agree with all of those things, but I think what we should be, now that we have at least something in writing, combined with the work Parks and Rec Commission has done over the last couple of years, we should be trying to find a responsible way to get to yes.
Mike, we should share Dymar's analysis. They did right, which is what Park and Rec based their numbers on, because these numbers may shock you a little bit in terms of what costs may actually be. I see yours are estimated. I would just like to add, thank you for coming in for the effort of putting together an analysis with a financial component. We appreciate that. Often we don't get that, so we do appreciate that. I echo what Jeff said, that we have some more due diligence to go through. One reservation I have to share with you is that that location was closed as a town beach a while back for lack of use, and it was expensive to operate with our lifeguards, and it turned out that it was more out-of-town residents that were benefiting from it than local residents. So I would just like to understand how we think that, I understand you guys are not all from Southbury, and I'm not trying to say that they should be, but if Southbury, it is identified in our plan as a deficiency, that people would like to see more lakefront, waterfront opportunities, but we don't own lakefront and waterfront. So we have to really go through all the proper steps to make sure our liability and our costs justify the expense.
And you know, things have changed in a litigious society. What we did learn a while ago was that even if you put up swim at your own risk, it's assumed you know that people are swimming there, and it's you have to, you're still liable for that. So it's a much more difficult world today than it was 30 years ago.
That's why Councilor Tinley is fully in favor of this.
Right.
I think part of this was predicated upon not knowing, excuse me, how the town would embrace this. In other words, how much use would the town itself actually have into this? And I think that's a consideration. You know, does the town want anything to do with the property? Or
Even that was brought up to my attention was, that's a great place for the geese, and we know that dealing with geese can become very problematic.
You don't want to deal with the geese.
But I think that, you know, and also in the strategic plan, we talked about, and we're going to start talking about, is now it's about implementation, so it doesn't just sit on the shelf. We have something potentially here that could be the beginning of an implementation plan against one of the elements of the plan. Let's see where it goes.
Jason,
but I think it's worth pursuing.
Jason, I thought you were about to.
I was, but I've lost my train of thought there. But yeah, I think we should go through the steps, explore it, evaluate, and you said Dustin's coming when?
I'm hoping to have him here with what he thinks is his potential cost would be on November 2nd meeting is the 15th.
Second meeting in November, and you'll talk to Parks and
Rec.
And I'll make sure I'm at next Thursday's meeting to brief them on our conversation. And I do think if it's possible, Jeff, if we could get this over to the full commission, I think that's worthwhile, so they're not blindsided by it.
do you want us to take?
No, I think that, I mean.
I can get it.
Or I can do it. I mean, I could send it to Charlie and ask him to share it with everybody.
You know, we do have somewhat of a sense of urgency in terms of starting to, well, you know, you're in this world, so it's the sooner you can get ideas, get funding, and this is the time of year to really plant the seeds from a funding standpoint.
And also for us, for the town, I think the timing as we start looking at the numbers here, the timing's right. We're gonna start going into budget planning, you know, the department heads are starting to go into budgets already and dig in, and we're gonna spend the first 6 months of next year.
We're gonna spend a fair amount of time in the. Exactly. There's a lot going on, so, you know, I just wanna caution you, it moves slowly here to get all this done, so I don't want to give you expectations of the spring right away, but because there's a lot moving.
Yesterday's not realistic.
So I remember what I was going to ask.
There you go.
And it's something we talked about. I don't know now, beginning of this year, whenever this came up previously, and that's sort of the structure of the land. I know the town owns portion, and we own the right of way, and then we do not, I believe First Light owns the beach area. There's a line somewhere there. So has any thought on your end gone to like the structure of how that would work for your proposal vis-a-vis First Light, and what, you know, like, are you looking for the town to get easements from First Light and, you know, lease stuff or assign stuff off to you, or has any thought been put into sort of the dynamics of that, and then permitting from First Light, obviously, for docks and whatnot that you're talking about?
And I might be able to maybe shed a little light on that. Months ago, we approached First Light, because certainly we weren't aware of ownership or who had what, or what, you know, what the situation was over there. And we were told by First Light that certainly they did own it, but that they had given the town of Southbury a right of way to either use it or traverse it or whatever it was. And all they wanted for us to be able to use it was for the town of Southbury to just let us to use their right of way. So they're well aware of what the situation is. And I believe, nobody knows exactly who owns what over there, I suppose. If there's a line, it's arbitrary. Things change over time with water course and that type of stuff. But First Light was just about ready to sign it over to us, but they knew that Southbury had a stake in it, and that's all they were worried about.
Yeah. I do believe that the vice chair of the commission, Larry Ernst, has spoken to First Light at some point in the last 6 months. It has it might be able to shed a little bit of light, so I'll talk to them next week.
How did your organization handle the blue-green algae last summer and the summer before?
Theoretically, you don't handle blue-green algae.
Right. True, but does it shut you down?
But I will tell you that the river is, it's a very unique ecostructure down there. When the whole northern, maybe top quarter of that water course normally stays pretty clear. It's once you start getting below the state boat ramp, or much below the sandbar, is where these issues occur because the water course widens out, the water moves slower, there's a lot more sun there, and that's what precipitates this blue-green algae growth. But like I said, up in this area on the northern side, it's narrower, it moves a little faster, and the issuance of the blue-green algae is actually a little lower. Not that it never happens, right, but it's a lot less precipitant up there. So again, we don't handle the blue-green algae.
But how does it affect your operation?
But the state does test. Mm-hmm. So that's why you see a lot of, like the beaches, they'll close them because, of course, the levels are too high.
Right.
All right. That's really restricts swimming. It's really, you'll see people water skiing and boating out there.
So
they
it doesn't,
they can't physically stop the usage they can only stop usage of the activity at that location, the state locations.
Which we would likely adhere to.
Right. So if you're a homeowner on the lake, they can't stop you from.
Yeah, I think what the selectman is saying is, if the state declare, closes it, or recommends to us, because it would be ours, that no, that shuts you down.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
That means we can't operate that day or, for the term until they test again.
Understood.
Yeah.
And then it becomes the issue that if it's shut down, what do we have to do? Do we have to keep somebody there that says you can't swim here? We have to find all that out.
Right.
All right?
I'd just like to point out that First Light's got a very clearly defined and relatively simple process for getting permission to put a dock in. And it's true for everybody up and down both sides of the lake. I actually have the forms on my website right now because I have a couple properties for sale in the lake. But it's very simple and it's very easy to understand. So that's it.
So go back to your question on dealing with First Light. I would suggest, Mike, that you kind of lead the way, and let us know what you want us to do with First Light.
Let me talk to the
because they're going to defer back to you.
They essentially own to the 110 line, and then from there is the town has is the right of way of the highway is at the 110 marker to the center line.
All that homework. They did all that homework when they came to us. So
right.
They have that information. Just need to
put it all together.
So what would you see as the next step from our standpoint?
If First Selectmen's all right with it, I'll reach out to Charlie and to Dustin, just so he's aware, and I'll suggest that they put it on the agenda for next week, so I could brief them on our conversation today, and see if, whether it's at this meeting or maybe their next meeting, they would invite you to walk this through and see if they're open. Let's see this also, that they've worked on this for a while, to some form of, partnership collaboration of a committee, to begin moving it forward.
We are, all right?
I think it's great that you guys are doing this, and, it's a noble thing to be helping out folks that need the help. My only comment, well, I probably have other comments, but the one that comes to mind is that being an engineer, I would have liked to have seen a site plan or a drawing to kind of back up your costs, because going to Jennifer's comments, I suspect the costs are going to be quite a bit higher than you think to put in that driveway.
Yeah, and I think the Daymar plan, they have detailed numbers in that plan, so I think putting those two together would really be helpful.
We did go through the Park and Rec. They shared their plan.
Oh, they did.
And their costs with us. So that's where a lot of ours would derive from, plus meetings that we had, or Bob had actually.
Maybe it's based on it, but I didn't get that impression reading the proposal.
Yeah,
as things change, those plans were for many years ago. If we were going to do anything, we need to, number one, you'd have to have a new inland wetlands approval to do anything over there. Secondly, you would have to make sure the plan conforms with ADA requirements, and rightfully so, and what that total build out will cost to to do all that, including, I think the original plans did not include putting in a septic system.
There's no bathroom, right?
So now, we're looking, so that number has grown not only from time, but also scope of what this could be. So we need to remember that. We talked about what it cost back then. Well, that was a simple.
Yeah, but the numbers that Parks and Rec put together are more recent than when it was, years back when, when they first had the money. They did update those numbers. I believe they did them through Dunbar, and they went back and sort of got some updated budgets. But let's begin the process next week and see if we can make some progress.
Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, next is John Catel's been asked to give a Public Works update on, everybody knows we've talked about it, but the weather's been killing us. And it continues to be an issue, but John, if you will, talk to the board about that.
Yeah, I got 3 items up there, road, bridges, and recycling. I'd like to start with the recycling, because that's been one of the latest changes. I came to the board back on March 15th, presenting an option of joining an interlocal in Bridgeport with the various towns there and band together with a more favorable rate. And we basically tabled it. We didn't want, or not tabled, but we didn't act on it. At that time, just to give you a little idea of what our recycling costs are, back in February, before I came, we were actually making $15 a ton for recycling. I'll take one step back further so you have an idea of the size. We do about 1,600 tons a year, just to give you a rough idea. That March, and from March to June, we started paying $15 a ton, and that's when I first brought this forward to you as an option. From July to August 8th, the price went up to $20 a ton. Since August 8th, we are paying now $65 a ton to get rid of it. This is now more expensive to get rid of recycling than it is MSW. Our MSW, when you include the cost of hauling. So our tonnage cost for recycling now is $86 a ton. Our cost for getting rid of your MSW, which is municipal solid waste, is $82.50. The interlocal group is about to go forward with a 5-year contract with multiple 1-year renewals with, which is now called Oak Ridge. It was, who the heck was it before? It's now Oak Ridge. They're meeting, their CEOs and voting representatives are meeting next Friday to approve this contract. We are included if we want to still join the interlocal. I don't want to turn around and throw something on saying you need to make a decision right this minute, but I could probably get away with the next meeting if to put it off, but they're looking to vote to approve it on the 26th. Talking to one of the other past presidents of the interlocal, maybe it could go to the beginning of November before we could have to commit. But if we want to be part of this group, we would basically have to join the interlocal, and then we automatically could then go into with this contract.
What's the cost of the contract?
The contract, the way the contract is currently, our cost is set at $65. It's based on whatever Winter Brothers was the company, which is now Oak Ridge, whatever they raise it to. The contract, and that's why I didn't push this much earlier, because I wanted to make sure we had the right details so I could give you what it is. They're paying right now $25 a ton from now to December. And then after December, it's based on what they call an ACR, which is an average cost of revenue. So the way that works is you take all your
recyclable items, there's an estimate of what the makeup is of percentages of cardboard, of glass, paper, whatever, and you have a certain average that comes out to saying, okay, this is what they make. Right now, that ACR, the market is about $45 a ton. Starting in January, the interlocal contract, for every dollar that the ACR is below the $65, they will have to pay. So the ACR right now is $20. They would be paying $45. So if you look at it right now, the average revenue that they make from these recyclables is $20. That's $45 less than what the $65. They'd be paying $45. When you get to between 65 and 85, it's a zero. You don't pay any tip fee. If the markets do even better than that, they go from $85 up to $110, you get an extra quarter for every ton. So you're starting to reap a little bit of the benefit of the high markets. Years ago, the markets were up in the hundreds. And then you could also, above $110, you get 50 cents profit. So we're at a point where, to kind of cut to the chase, we're right now operating at a cost of $32,000 a year extra of what we would be paying staying by ourselves versus joining them, if the ACR stayed at this current $20 range.
But the reason we didn't partake of it originally was because of the reservations the town attorney had with regard to the fact that the other larger towns could basically tell us, dictate to us.
Yes, he gave you a letter. I will highlight the points. He's here if he wants to yell at me and say, no, that's not right. I have no objection or complaints to that. But some of the major concerns that he brought up was the fact that there are broad powers of the committee. Big one was the weighted average of the voting. It's kind of similar to the way the voting is. It's kind of similar to our federal government, where when the small states were fighting with the big states of how they turn around and get represented. So they said, okay, half of it is an equal share, and the other half is based on the amount that you deliver.
That's the Connecticut Compromise, by the way. That's what they call it. But that's neither here nor there.
I will take that as a history lesson here. So the way this works is 50% of the vote is equally shared among the number of members. The other 50% of the vote is divvied up based on the amount of tonnage you deliver. So that was one of his concerns, as that your larger towns could band together and change the items more favorably to them. The ability for the group to bill for an aggregate administrative cost. They do that on your MSW side for getting a certain amount of funds to pay for attorneys or something if they're in negotiations or outside consultants. And it's very, I think it's 10 cents per ton on the MSW side is what they do. And this other ones was, let's see, it was concerned that the larger towns could change it where your charge costs based on, instead of by a ton versus, or by a membership versus ton. So it's all your big versus small and how you vote is what it is. That, it was a little bit vague and a little bit open. Those are the reasons why you, based on his recommendations, why you did not want to do it. I'm fine with whatever you want to do. You're the decision makers, but I feel it's my obligation to come to you when I saw a drastic change going from $20 up to $65. If that changes the way you look at things.
The contract is for 5 years?
The contract with the Oak Ridge is a 5-year contract with automatic renewals for 1 year, 1 year increments.
And that was not negotiable, right? We couldn't do it for 3 years?
This is the contract with the interlocal and Oak Ridge. Our contract would be with joining the interlocal, and that one went out to 2030 something.
Okay.
Which was another concern about how long it was.
Right.
You're able to get out at the end of the contract, so it would be like 5 years. You'd be locked in for the 5 years that the contract was going on. And then you could submit to get out of the group if you want to leave after that.
But historically, based on the way it's been increasing over this last 6 months, 32,000 a year right now, is you're saying is more than what we would have paid had we have signed on with it.
Yes. Right now, if we would have gotten on it, that interlocal, they were paying $20 a ton up until October 1st. From October 1st to the end of the year, they'd be paying $25. And then starting January 1 is when it goes to changing based on that ACR, and current cost would be $45 a ton.
So, does that include hauling? Is that an all-in price?
That's all exclusive of the hauling for the recycling, because we pay the hauling to the same spot.
But our hauling right now, you said with hauling, we're paying 86 per ton. So when you say January 1st, it's 45, that's the comparison, the difference between 45 and 86?
No, 45 and 65.
45 and 65.
Right. I'm taking the hauling out because we're getting it there under both the same cost.
Okay, so that one,
We pay the same hauling no matter which
matter what.
contract,
Right.
we pay the same
Exactly.
Is it a different vendor for the recycling? We don't use Winter Brothers for.
We've been using Winter
So it's
Brothers.
the same, so will the same single stream recycling infrastructure remain? Or will there have to be different education to residents about what can and can't be?
It's this, we're taking to the same place. No
okay.
matter what we do, that doesn't change.
Same item, okay.
There's stuff out there trying to get glass out of the recycling because it contaminates it. Depends on how much you want to get into recycling issues out there. Bottom line is the markets are tanked. And China is very strict of what they take. As it is,
we're gonna have to deal with, unexpected cost in the recycling, during this budget cycle for sure. So, just to let you know that.
Yeah, that's one of the other things I was going to mention. In March, we already submitted our budget. In March, when the rates we started paying instead of receiving, the board as well as the finance committee, we estimate a $30 ton and financed it for a $30 ton. So we're still now short $35 a ton if it stays at the 65, so you're looking around $55,000, $56,000 that probably in December or somewhere around there, I'll be coming back and saying.
Yeah, no, I know, I read a
money.
story recently, Stanford made $95,000 last year, and this year, it's gonna cost them $700,000. So, we're not, every town in the entire nation.
Yep.
So, do you have a recommendation for us, or?
Does the town council have a suggestion on the contract issues?
I think the problem is that we've already lost money by not being part of it.
Yeah.
We can stay away from the contractual issues and the big brother theory, but at what expense?
Right. And right now, like I say, estimate, it's a $32,000 expense difference, roughly speaking.
And only increasing at the rate it's going.
The interlocals cost, if the ACR, which is currently at, say, 20 now, drops to 10, their cost is going up another $10 too. Will ours, how quick they decide, well, let's hit all the other towns.
How often does that change? So it goes 45 in January 1, and then...
The way the contract is set up is that they will look at it quarterly and adjust that quarterly. This is for the contract portion of it. So they'll take the last 3 months of that previous quarter, look at what the ACR was, and that will adjust it for the oncoming next.
So that 45 is good through March, and then we don't...
That
We don't know what
45 is
happens
just
after
what was thrown out as the current one today. Come January is when you actually go, is when you're actually looking at it, and then following the ACR, up or down. Depends on what the markets want to do.
So I
I'd be
just,
willing to take the risk to try to save the money based on what I know. I don't claim to be any kind of expert here, but it sounds like it's not small change we're talking about.
Regionalization in this front, on the recycling front, is how a lot of towns are dealing with it, to have a little more scale, a little more buying power. I mean, that's really what you ultimately
Makes
have.
sense that the bigger buyer is gonna get a better deal than the smaller buyer.
And, you know, I think some of the concerns we've had contractually were the big versus little, would we lose power? But big doesn't want the price to go up either. The question is that I'm not clear on is, do they have the right in the contract to push more of that cost to the smaller guy? Then it's an issue. And I don't recall, you know, and I certainly want to have a refresher on that, what that risk is. But in general, this type of regionalization makes sense. It's the trend going on. That's how most towns are dealing with it. Or they're fully getting rid of recycling. For us, we'd just be sending it and burning it, and that, to me, that's not a viable option. It's not a responsible
just so you get an idea of the players that are in the interlocal, there's 12 of them that would be in the recycling, which is close to the same numbers that are in the actual garbage. And that's gone on, you know, this kind of a weighted vote. It's been going on for the past 10 years down there. You'd take, I think when I looked at one point in time, you'd need 5 of your largest towns to turn around and gang together to say, okay, let's try and screw the little guy. And that's not really, I mean, they don't really work like that. In fact, when I was down in Bridgeport, I think Bridgeport was being the largest, got the worst deal of everything, but that was besides the point.
So Stanford doesn't obviously take advantage of this.
Stanford is not in, yeah, it's not in this group.
Yeah,
They should think about it.
At what point economically does it just make sense to say, okay, we're not gonna recycle anymore, just handle everything like trash? I know Mike's against that, and theoretically, yeah, we're all against it, but from a money point of view, where do you draw the line and say, you know, it's just not cost effective?
We're trying to be politically correct or whatever. Yes, am I gonna say, okay, that can belongs in that bin versus you put it in the garbage? I'm not gonna be that enforcement of it, you know, banging them over the head. But we have state laws that require us to recycle, and therefore we must still recycle.
So even if it's not cost effective, you still have to do it?
Even if it's not cost effective.
I mean, if you look at a pure financial standpoint, it's not worth recycling. But when you look at what our environment is worth, there's no question.
Right.
So,
Valuable.
you know, we have to do.
And the market is cyclical. The market's been cyclical. It hasn't been this bad before. It's complicated by current relations with China right now. It's complicated by poor recycling. You know, single stream recycling had very good intent to make it easy to recycle, but if somebody throws a plastic bag in, that's why China really implemented the ban, was that the recycling content they were getting from the United States of America was of low quality, so they couldn't resell it to make new stuff from it. So that's, to me, it's there, and there are a lot of organizations working on trying to improve that. But it is cyclical, and I think to Jeff's point, there are investments you make in time that get paid off in other ways. And I think we're far away from a conversation about the town walking away from recycling.
MSW.
At least as long as I'm here on the.
MSW and recycling is not as complicated as EMS. It's it's a little more straightforward.
It's a little simpler.
Plus, as I said, there are regulations in place that require us.
We're required to do it.
And we should.
The state's been looking at, you know, to improve the recycling quality. I think that the state throughout is trying to get glass out of the recycling. They're offering up for municipalities to, instead of have it go into single stream, to collect it separately, but then they don't have anything as to, nobody's jumped on this thing. This just came out in the beginning of October. No one's jumped on it because it's okay, I separated out my transfer station, now what do I do with the glass? And that, nobody's come up with a decision on that.
And that's where, you know, there are towns that have talked about to help with single stream recycling to make the stream, the literal stream, higher quality. That's where plastic bag bans have been discussed and implemented with varying degrees of success and failure in certain towns. So,
and you also, that's where you're getting into the nickel deposit, 10% deposit.
And some of that stuff is looking at.
We asked in the survey if people would be willing to pay more for a bigger community center or a bigger, certain things. I wish we had asked, would you be willing to pay more for recycling? Some like, who would say no? And who would know that you get money for,
people
we
are
used to
doing
get
it
money
too.
for
I mean,
recycling.
our tonnage continues, that's part of it, right?
Our tonnage, one of the things in your solid waste industry, as I said, you have the big boys kind of eating up the smaller ones. In town for garbage collection, we had Copes. They were taken over by, we had Stringer that was taken over by Copes, and now Copes is now taken over by USA.
Yeah.
A lot of you who may have curbside collection might have just recently gotten a bill that will almost doubled your cost to pick up your garbage because you're getting into your bigger companies. They are automating their services. They're getting away from picking it up, the recycling with the bins. They're going to side loaders. Because they're going to the side loaders, those trucks are a little bit too big and we can't handle them at the recycling center, at the transfer station. I have no problem with them going somewhere else because it's a cost. I'd almost encourage to try and get rid of the commercial portion.
So we should take our recycling to Middlebury and Oxford then instead of?
Well, the commercial haulers I mean, I have no problems having our recycling available for our residents who come to the transfer station to dump it off. Do we turn around and say, hauler, you're the one who picks it up, you gotta take it to, at your cost to wherever it is?
They may be billing customers based on their model that shows they're hauling the recycling out of town or to a recycling center. And if you did that, they may not raise it because that's already in their model.
And then also to John, if we explore that, and those are conversations we should have, there are economic development implications there because you're creating a less friendly economic, business environment if their costs may be higher for, so I think it is a complex issue.
So much for economy of scale, it didn't work this time.
But I think for now, those are the conversations we have before we get to the point of we're stopping recycling.
Right, I didn't want to go that.
Just for the record, nobody's talking about not recycling, okay?
Right, but I would like to get a little bit of direction, I guess, as to, or am I looking to the group to say, please keep us in there and we're gonna move on it, or are we gotta?
I'll make a motion that we should join the interlocal, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Or do we want more information? I'll make that motion and we can discuss it, or?
I mean, at least if and I'm not looking to have a definite vote to approve tonight, but, because I know you want to turn around and have your attorney review it, everything, but I would at least, if you're seriously thinking about this is what we think we're going to do, so that I can at least go to the board, to the group down there and say, my board is very serious about doing it. They just need a little time to go through everything and get.
Frankly, I don't think we're not that big. I frankly think they're like, well, whatever you want to do. You want to do it, fine. If not, that's fine too, because.
Yeah, they don't care.
Right. I mean, I think we should take a look at the contract again. I think we evaluate the legal issues. We've done that. We look at the, upside on balance. I mean, as I'm listening to everything, it seems to me that it makes sense to proceed and, get the savings, and the legal risks are not, they're more contractual in nature. They don't seem that significant. But I think we should, since we do have time, I think we should circulate that again so we could all take another look at the agreement before the next meeting and then vote on it then.
And I assume we need a new contract because their numbers have changed as well, right?
No, the contract that you guys looked at was joining the interlocal.
Okay.
And they were in negotiations at the time for this contract. Now that it looks like this is the contract that they're going with, that's why I'm kind of giving you what the flavor is, especially with the change in the cost that just occurred recently.
I'd like us to have just one last chance, see if town attorney has any additional comments to make, so we can then take action at our next meeting.
Okay, and I think what we realize here is that we were concerned about essentially getting the cost put down onto us, what that increased cost would be, and what they could do to us. Well, it's happened to us anyway, which has been the increase.
Yeah, I mean, when we had this discussion, we were paying $20, right? We went from, I forget what we were receiving, we went from that to paying 20, and now, you know, we're up to 65, so this is a much different discussion than it was, and the delta, when we spoke about this last time, was not that much on a
Right, the
yearly basis.
interlocal was making maybe 25 or something or whatever, and we were only making 20 and we were making 15. I think there was like a $5 difference for at that moment.
And we have more information because their agreement is,
Now you have an agreement
didn't
that
have
this is
that
what's going
last
forward.
time,
Plus, we're in a trade.
So I will, like I said, the one individual said he thinks that I can wait until the November 1st. The other one says, no, we gotta know whether, but I'll plead and I'll go to the meeting, plead and say we're highly
And
encouraged.
if you hear that you need to, and this is important, we'll have to have a special meeting to take action.
because we
Okay.
love to meet.
Yeah, we've been doing that a lot.
We love meetings.
We love to meet.
John, can you give the rest of
Meeting-
the?
Yeah, so without the other stuff, I'll just try and get through so that to update John. It's just started out, I think everybody knows that this is probably one of the wettest, rainiest summers, construction periods over the last decade, if not a couple of them. That being said, it has affected our construction, road construction, bridge construction issues. Where are we at? Paving, we have George's Hill. We have a binder on George's Hill. It's about a little over 1.5 miles of fresh asphalt we have down there. We're hoping to get the O&G coming in and paving it. I'm looking for next week to put the top layer on that. We also have Jeremy Swamp Road, the intersection at Holes Hill. That's maybe a total of a little over a 1/10 of a mile or so of paving. Our crews in-house, we installed 3 bridges, which are now, they're culverts, they're concrete box culverts. Before they had some pipes that were under there that were clogged and deteriorating, plus we raised the whole intersection. The road is still open as far as it's a, just dirt process. Next week, we're looking at trying to at least get a binder on that, so you got asphalt on it. I'm hoping to get actually both Jeremy Swamp and George's paved. This all is based on weather and getting the contractors in to do it. Everyone's backed up. But the goal is to get both those roads paved by the end of next week, or at least close to it. And that's just hope that it doesn't rain anymore. Hot in Place was a trial. We did 3 roads of Hot in Place, which heats up the asphalt there and then lays it back down. We did Woodlands Hills, Grandview Road, and Ridgewood Road. Total is about 1 1/3 miles, and then on top of that, we put a chip seal and then a fog seal. We have, I've heard some people say it came out pretty good, and these are some of our critical people.
So you do a chip seal on top of the Hot in Place?
Yes, you have to
Okay.
put something on top of the Hot Place. Sometimes you do a microsurface, or you can do a chip seal.
So it's like asphalt recycling that you're
It's
using?
you're taking the same
On the
asphalt and putting it
spot.
right back
That's
down.
pretty cool.
Quite
Hot,
something to
actually.
watch.
And it's good savings on it too, so.
So Dick likes it, huh?
Yes. He said it came out well. We haven't striped any of the roads yet. When we get done with George's Hill and Jeremy, then we'll bring in company and get all the roads striped out properly. Chip seal, we did about a little over 3 miles worth of chip sealing with the fog seal on it. We had intended to do about 7.5 miles. The other 4.5 is going to have to be deferred until spring. It's just too many wet days. You can't do that stuff when it's wet out there. We were originally planning on doing another 7 to 10 miles as it was on our plan for chip sealing in the spring. This is just gonna get it up to about 14 now, thereabouts.
So weather permitting next year, will we be able to catch up?
We still plan on,
Okay.
I plan on using it all up before July 1st and rolling it right into the following fiscal year.
Thank you.
One of the issues on top of it is not just rain, weather, but now that we're in the fall season, the leaves are creating a problem with getting the chip sealing done. So you just can't, we can't get moving ahead.
That, and then when you fog seal, it takes a little bit longer to dry quicker, and, you know, you get a little bit more complaints and all. So we're done with chip sealing. We got everything that we chip sealed fogged, so that was our hope. Parking lots, we were trying to get, this fall, trying to get the lower parking lot of Town Hall paved. We had a fuel tank, an old heating fuel tank in there. We finally got that out of there. We buttoned it up, we put some asphalt down, we redid some of the drainage. We'll wind up doing the actual paving of that, milling it up and paving it next year in the spring also. I don't want to start opening that up at this point in time. And then once we do that, we can roll in and do some of the other parking lots that were on the plan for next year. Bridges, we basically increased our bridge number. We originally had 10 federal bridges which are over 20 feet and 28 bridges that are between 6 and 20 feet, which are called the local. With the 3 new small ones that we are now bridges on Jeremy Swamp, that increased 3 there. Our Spruce Brook Road project, as part of the design, there's an overflow channel. This overflow channel now becomes another federal bridge that's over 20 feet. We will not have to deal with it, you know, as far as going forward, but this basically brings us up to 42 bridges that we have in this town that we're maintaining. The opening of Spruce Brook Road, again, this has not been a very favorable summer. The rain is just killing us out there. Between the soils that are there, which are very silty type of material, and the rain, it's turned into a lot of issues that require a little bit more engineering and processes to make sure things stay stabilized. Originally we were hoping to get the thing opened up for at least traffic on the 26th of October. We're looking now probably around the 16th of November. And a lot of that has to deal also with the fact of getting the paver in. It's a disadvantaged business enterprise. We're required to have a certain percentage on this project of disadvantaged business, DBEs. Based on that, we need to use this one vendor that was put into the program, and their availability is not until November 8th, as it is. So we have to get that done, and then also then get the guardrails, and we can open up for traffic.
So essentially, even if we wanted, if we have a paver and a roller, if you want, we can't, it has to be done by the disadvantage.
Right, otherwise we jeopardize federal funding because then we don't meet our 13% requirement of DBE usage. So we're kind of locked into this vendor's schedule, and that's kind of driving a lot of it right now also.
Any questions?
Thank you.
This is an update. I thought it was important. This has been difficult, and we're, you know, yes, I asked John, I hope if weather in the spring turns around, we hope to catch up with the amount of money that's being spent. The Board of Finance talked about that, and you know, it was always a concern of the Board of Finance that the money never got spent, and we've been spending the money, but this is understandable due to weather conditions that hopefully we'll catch up in the spring, and we'll keep moving on that road program, which is essential to our budget. Especially down the road.
There's the East Flat Hill Bridge project as well. And
the East Flat Hill Bridge starts next spring, so we're in the process of selection for inspection engineering.
It's been designed, that project will be going out to bid the end of November for construction probably. Okay?
Just quickly, John, it looks like the state's just about done with what they're doing. That's exit 16.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything from them about, are they coming down to do 15, 14, 13, any of the stuff that they had on the table years ago?
There's exit 14 there's a plan for that in about 2 or 3 years, pending the funding on it.
Depending on the funding.
Which straightens, it goes from Main Street South all the way up to the Lakeside Georges Hill intersection. So they'll address all that. The state's going along 84 and doing a lot of the bearing work. You can see some of that already under 15 where they're doing maintenance issues. Under 14, they've been doing maintenance issues also.
Very good, thanks.
Anything else? Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up is public comment, if there's any public comment. Any public comment? Any public comment? Okay, no public comment, thank you. Announcements and correspondence, you have in your package.
Good.
You also see the reports. We'll move to G, consent agenda. Can I have a motion is there a motion to accept?
I'll move.
Second?
I'll second it.
Made and second, any discussion on the consent agenda?
I just had one question regarding the job description for the assistant town clerk role. Was that an existing job description previously? Because I know it had been approved years back. Were there any changes or updates made to
The only change was, as we have talked about, is
the flexibility.
the flexibility of
Yep.
being able to use.
And that's fine.
And my concern was, we have great employees, they've always been
Should
willing.
always have that.
Alls I need is someone saying, not in my,
You should always have that there.
okay?
It was a well-written job description, I thought, and
Right.
I enjoyed reading it. Thought I might
Okay.
apply for the job.
Oh, another? Yeah,
No, I'm ready to vote.
Okay, that's what I was about to say. I'll call the vote, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? It carries. Okay, next, minutes of our October 4th, 2018 regular meeting.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of October 4th and October 11th.
Second, please.
Second.
Made and second, any discussion on that?
Yeah, but that one only says October 4, doesn't have the October 11 special meeting minutes.
The one on the website does have.
Right, I know,
is
so I just
corrected.
want to make sure that the
Yeah.
resolution reflects both.
If we're voting on
And the
both, we have to add the other
October
one.
It is on the agenda. I think that's just the wrong agenda pulled up. The agenda that's on the website
We can do it at the next meeting.
is correct.
We can do
Yeah, it
it.
has both of them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
They're saying we can just do it next time.
No, it's fine if it's on you said it's,
So let's accept this, and then let's do the other at the next
Website-
meeting.
Oh, okay. The agenda posted on the website
It has both.
has both.
I have, there's both. I just, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
So we could just, let's do it.
So, again, motion to approve the minutes of October 4th, 2018 regular meeting and the October 11th, 2018 special meeting.
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion on it? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And it carries. Next up, unfinished business is strategic plan. Oh, look, where did you find that clicker pointer?
We approved that.
I'm the last to know.
what's with this? We got a
New
new microphone?
microphones.
All the cool toys coming in.
I don't know.
Something happened to mine, nobody knows what.
We're gonna have to check that line
To
item
do
a
a
little
pointer,
better
a
next
laser
year.
pointer.
I guess I gotta turn it on first, right?
That's brand new, I don't know.
It works.
There we go.
Okay, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk to you folks tonight. Under the leadership of Jennifer and John, we've taken a group of volunteers who've spent countless hours collaborating. They've been transparent and inclusive. And I think what you're going to see, and what you have probably already seen, I think your first came out in August, was a pretty comprehensive draft. So what I'd like to do is walk you through the contents of this. I got a brief presentation, and then there's a handout. And I will talk about what we ask of the board here in just a few minutes. But like John said, this is John Monteleone, and we were tired of hearing about this 1770-something thing that he keeps talking about needs to be done here. Okay, so first of all, what I'm going to do is walk you through a few things. I got a few key messages, which is really an executive summary. There's some benefits of the plan. I think it's important to talk about those. Task force members, the approach we used, this whole framework for the plan I think is real important. And then we'll end with what we call approval and implementation, okay? All right, so the key messages, I don't really have to dive deep into the first one, but you know, it's part of the charter and it's subject to your approval and it needs to be updated on a regular basis. What we see in the work we do, and by the way, I'm Paul Butler, I'm a resident and a volunteer for this task force. I should have introduced myself. In March, Jeff moved on this with John, and they put a planning task force in place. It included town leaders, commissioners, employees, and residents, and that was our job. That was our charter, to go out and do it. And the whole plan would set the priorities for town governance and responsible and sustainable growth. And you'll see in just a few minutes, these are all recommendations. They have to be approved by the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, and everything else has to go through this. But the last bullet I think is real important. The work we've been doing for the last year plus is what I call real time. It's a working process, and nothing has stood still. If we've uncovered something, people have acted on it. So it's a real-time process, and important needs have been addressed along the way. Last thing I'd like to say is this town does a lot of great things. And in the spirit of this strategic plan is how good can this town be? So it's a lot going for it, really does. Be proud to live here. So everybody on this Board of Selectmen should be proud of the task force members. They represented the group real well. We got a couple of them back there. We lost one of them a few minutes ago, but got a couple here. And a couple of them are on the board here. So here's what it's designed to do. To help promote, and the key word there is desired economic growth. We talk about smart growth. And that's the balance with preserving growth and natural resources in the environment. Cost-effective, high-quality services. Town is really doing well on how they're running, but again, how good can it be? And this whole quality of life, that was a tough thing to tackle, and you'll see how we tried to break these things down. And is supposed to be assessed and adjust as time goes on. Strategic plans aren't meant to be written in stone. Something will happen within the next 6 months to a year that'll cause you have to adjust, and that's what this is all about. And this should be a living, breathing document. Alignment, focused, and efficient. That's what we want to that's what we really were hoping for as a task force. And here they are. I think some of you have seen this chart here. There are a lot of voting members, all of them representing all sorts of commissions here. And down the bottom, we have the advisory members here. And what I can say is pretty good attendance. People were committed, they jumped in, and put a lot of time and energy into this. Okay, there's 4 phases. I'm not going to read everything on this chart because we wouldn't be here. We'd be here till Christmas, but just a few things. On the organization, that first pillar from March to May, that was all about getting up and running. Everything from creating the task force, existing plan review, what our approach was, what the deliverables were. Then we moved into what we call a situational assessment. Every good strategic plan, the heavy lifting is doing the analysis. And we did what we call an internal and external scan. An internal scan is what's going on within the town, what do we know, what are all the facts, the data telling us. And the external scan is what's going on outside the town, the environment, the economic situation with the state. So we looked at both. And then we established work groups, we'll talk about in a few minutes. The big thing here was doing all this when we're putting together what we call a SWOT analysis. It's a great tool for strategy. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities and threats? And in my business, I do this work for a living. A lot of times we'll go into organizations, we'll see a SWOT analysis and we'll say, how did you determine what a strength was? Well, that was done because of all the data analysis. We were able to make judgment calls on what went in those buckets because of the research the task force did. Plan development, you can see we had the community survey and everything up. All along the way, we were really transparent and updating the community. We are on phase 4. Jennifer and I met with Jeff a while back, a week or so ago, had some really good insights and comments. A few things we tweaked, which were great ideas. And here's where we are. The stuff in the black is yet to be done. And I'll have an ask at the end of this presentation to get us there. Okay? All right. More in the process, kicked off. We had 23 monthly task meetings. We had goal teams that were working sessions, not only during the meetings, but beside them. We put a drafting team in place to draft this document. 2 of the members here of the drafting team are sitting beside me. Then we turned it over to editors for proofing. I don't know how many people hours that we put into this. It's in the thousands. So that's why I put that number up. The most important thing, there were too many cups of coffee to count. Okay? And we submitted this for approval in October, and that's where we are. Comprehensive. Who had input into this? Residents, businesses, elected town officials. I'm going to read this list because I think it's important. Town staff, board and commission, existing plans, plan of conservation and development, put a website up, had resources, presentations given, dedicated email, department head questionnaire, multiple workshops, public meetings, an art and culture forum, a business summit, and a community survey that was done by an outside group. And the confidence level on the survey response was in the 90 to 95% level. So you can feel good about that. It was well done, well executed. Again, those 3 words. So here's the framework. We have vision, which is what Southbury wants to be known for down the road. It's a look in the future. A mission, that's the purpose and the role that town government would play. Vision is moving forward. Mission is kind of the purpose and role. And the values, and we had a group of folks working on what we value as citizens we'd like to get into this plan. There were 3 goals, and by the way, that's not governmenteur on number 2, so take that R after the T. I caught it too late. So the grand list, and the grand list was something we wrestled with because we first struggled with what do we mean by the grand list, and is it to grow it, is it to maintain it? But learning a lot here, and if you change the grand list 1% and have that ratio 84-15 or whatever it is, you might need a half of an IBM to come back in to do that. So the question is what do we really need to do on the grand list? And we'll talk about that. Efficient town government and quality of life, okay? And so here's a visual. We have 6 strategic pillars, each of them going into one of these goals. For the grand list, you see advanced economic health. We started out with economic development, but that's only a small part of economic health. Enhanced community and neighborhood livability. And then with the quality of life, there were 2 emerging themes around improved culture and recreation and strengthened environmental health. And all of these intersect with each other. So as you're improving culture and recreation opportunities, it brings money into the town, and that helps economic health. There's a lot of research going on in the state. Culture and arts and everything else is a great economic development tool within any community. How do you foster high-performing government? Like I said, it's pretty high-performing now, but how good can it be? And this whole thing around public safety. Okay? So there was a handout that had this framework. The intention is not to go through that tonight, but to kind of give you a flavor, and I think Jennifer passed them out. In the handout itself, there's a deep dive of the vision, the missions in there that we drafted, and the values themselves. Okay? And then behind that, if you flip over to the next page, and I'm trying to do this by memory, is how it's all drafted. So for each one of those pillars, we have a description that you'll see. This is just a synopsis of the plan. but there's a description in there. There is also what we call objectives and measures, and there are some recommended actions. Now, somebody said there's a lot of actions in there, but a lot of those things are already underway. So we're not starting from scratch on that, and that's the important thing to realize. Okay? Here's our ask. Between now and that's November 2nd, I think.
Nope, November 1st.
Like I said, that's November 1st. Between now and the November 1st meeting, we're going to ask, I think you got your first draft in the end of August that went out to the Board of Selectmen. We've done a couple of tweaks to it since then. So what we're going to do is ask you to read through it one more time.
The final draft?
The final draft, which you all should have.
The one dated October 2nd?
The one dated October 2nd. Reach out to Jennifer or John, or probably you two most of all, right?
Yes, you can pass the buck.
Pass the buck to Jennifer, because she's keeping us on task, by the way. If any specific questions, comments, thoughts, and be ready to approve and advance the plan on November 2nd. First. On November 1st, you will advance, and November 2nd, the task force will celebrate.
Might be a little aggressive if we have to have any discussion on any changes. It can be difficult to get it all, sorted out by that next meeting. That's what
And why would that, I'm just curious why that might be an issue.
Well, because we only have one meeting. If we're going to have discussions and issues and we want to make changes, it takes a little time. We don't work every day.
No, I know that.
I think if you said it to them, most of the stuff I sat down and went over, they were, made sense.
So one of the things we might consider doing to that front, similar how when we were going through filling the Board of Education vacancy, if we send Jennifer questions or comments or issues we have via email independently, you can then compile them before our meeting, so we go in and know what any of the red flags or concerns might be, so we can have a more efficient, productive meeting, and hopefully get to a point where even if it's with suggested minor amendments, that we can approve the plan with suggested.
So the suggestion is to.
If there are major issues, that's a whole different story, and we'll address that then. But I think that's a way to address some, at least, of what might be if there are minor concerns.
So you've had it since August. Have you had any questions up to this point?
I have one. So one.
Yeah.
To the entire group. Extraordinary job. It's really impressive, and it's very thorough. A little daunting in some ways, and I think it should be regarding that in terms of this is a long-term strategic plan. So to everybody, congratulations and thank you on behalf of everybody, the whole town. I had one.
Sure.
I had one thing that one question that jumped out at me on the values section, and I was disappointed. It was the only disappointment I had in the entire plan.
And what was that?
Was that one of the values that everyone has been talking about from a business perspective, from a community perspective around the country, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that's a potential miss. In the value statement. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are central to not just moving, I think, the town forward, but the state and the country. It's a driver for economic growth.
I think it's probably a good ad.
So I think that's the one area I think, and the only other thing I saw is that last week or last meeting and the meeting before, we dissolved the community center committee. It's central to the plan, so I'd hope we would reorganize that committee, because I was thrilled to see it make it to the final cut. So. But again,
and the survey, there was some survey data that supported that too.
Congratulations and thank you.
I would, just to speak a little bit to the process, what we always did as a task force was whatever recommendations were made, we emailed to the full group. And when we met, we addressed it. So if it is possible, I would ask that all of your feedback come to me within a week, 10 days, and we could call a special meeting of the task force to just review it. Because remember, this was not made in a bubble. It was done with the input of the community. And so in the essence of transparency, we would want to continue that process. So I would be glad to make the list. I would like to And maybe it's a simple fix and it's not requiring a whole committee meeting, but maybe it does. And so I would just ask, that we continue that way, right?
Direct those concerns to Jennifer.
I would just say that this is a very significant document, it's very important, and I don't see a need to rush to get it done by November 1st. If it took another meeting, I don't think that's a problem, unless you see it as a problem, Jeff. I think
Jennifer,
it's taken a year and a half or more to get us to this point.
Let's see what questions come in.
Another extra week isn't gonna kill us.
And if they can, if, there's no reason, if the questions are not a problem, and I mean, some of the things I brought up, my concerns were answered pretty quickly and understood without.
It was as much clarity as anything, and you had some good suggestions.
So,
Yeah.
But I'm not the only person, I've looked at it, but I'm not the only person that has ideas, and I certainly value the board's ideas. So I think the best thing to do is move forward with directing to Jennifer your ideas or concerns or the wording, and we'll see where it goes from there.
So if I could just, I think that makes sense, and we should do that, and then, to George's point, we'll get to the next meeting, we'll get our answers, and if we want more discussion and whatnot, we can, always do that. We're not bound, to do it on that date. I do want to thank the task force. I mean, you guys have put a tremendous amount of work and effort into this.
Thank you.
You and Jennifer and John and Justin and all the members of the task force, I think you guys did a great job, and really were, involved so many segments of the community, and had a number of meetings, and, I didn't get to too many, but the couple I got to, I thought were great, and they were, well done and well informed. The one question I have notes and stuff, and I'll
Sure.
send those to Jennifer. One question I had, and I wasn't sure if you guys have put thought into it, and if not, maybe you can before our
Sure.
next meeting, is the implementation phase.
Yes, I got a couple slides on that right now.
Okay, I was just curious what you envisioned as the makeup of the committee and terms, or how you saw that.
That's a good question. So the whole thought is that we would transition, and once this commission, and this is a recommendation, I think the intention, Jennifer, is John Monteleone to come in and walk you through more details on the second.
If necessary.
If necessary. But
Yeah, I'm coming on the second.
maybe we can, he's with his mother who's celebrating her 98th birthday today somewhere. Yeah. So the whole thought is that how do you monitor and implement this thing? And the question is that structure in my world drives some sort of behavior. So the question is that could you have a strategic planning commission put in place? And the role would be, and this is something that still needs to be decided, and have a group, a makeup. It isn't determined yet, so this is what I'm trying to speak for. I'm trying to be John Monteleone here, by the way. Still a lot of things to decide. What needs to be accomplished? What's the charter? How do they work? Who'll do it? Why is it necessary? Really to kind of support the town and support the Board of Selectmen. Execution's all about, strategy's all about execution. And there's a lot of really good things in here, but there's some things in here that need to be prioritized and looked after. But it's really a commission to support you folks. And still, how will it be accomplished and when? And that's some things that I think a small group is working on right now. Jennifer, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I really don't. John's got a presentation on the implementation. Sorry.
I've asked him to keep it. We've asked him to keep it to one slide. Okay.
That's not going to happen. But
a lot of boxes.
But John could be watching.
I think you said the word, and it wasn't part of it. You said the word charter as you were going through this. I think there is, in terms of, I agree we don't have to make a vote on the next meeting, but I do think that if there are elements of the strategic plan that may or may not impact the work that the Charter Review Commission is doing, we should take that into account. So there is some time sensitivity. Certainly, I think the more feedback they have as they're reviewing, if they have the opportunity to review a final approved strategic plan, to look at the charter, see if there's anything that they might need to address. I do think that's one of the time sensitive, it's not super time sensitive, but certainly doesn't make us delay a week or 2 weeks, but I just think that's something to consider.
The only thing I would add is that Paul Butler is an expert at facilitating and at strategic planning, and we benefited greatly by his expertise at no cost to the town whatsoever. So kudos to you and thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
See you in 2 weeks.
so get it
To Jennifer.
to questions and concerns to Jennifer, and we'll take it up next week.
I do think it's important to have a date certain to bring it back up because, you know, this process could continue infinitum. And quite frankly, the plan has physically been done by the task force since the end of July. So all we've been doing is massaging it and enhancing it, but the substance of the plan has been around since your first copy of it in August.
Yeah, I think the intent should be that if we are in a position to, that we move it forward at the next meeting. That should be our intent.
Yeah.
But again, we're not married.
See if we can get that done. If not, it
Exactly.
doesn't kill us if it slides to the next
Exactly.
meeting.
Hey, thanks for the honor to be able to do this. Appreciate it.
So much,
Thank you.
Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
And you want to just
Oh, by the way, I want to
recognize
recognize two very important members. Would you stand up and introduce yourself?
I am Catherine Smith. And I'm Donna Lush.
And they are two of the best writers and editors you'll ever meet.
Thank you.
Along with Jennifer, she's a great editor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
for all your
Paul.
work.
Very appreciative.
You can go now. You guys do not have to stay.
We lost one.
So wrong.
Okay, next up is the Southbury Ambulance Association. SAA has applied for an upgrade. You have it in your, to have a paramedic in town. There is a application before the state, and they're asking us to do for a letter from this board. So I'm just trying to find out what your feelings are about that and what you'd like to do.
I thought I had seen some correspondence, or was there some discussion about a potential meeting occurring with
OEMS.
with OEMS, Region 5,
Yeah.
I would just like to ask
SAA. Is
Geraldine to
that,
come up.
Wait a minute.
is that something that's in the works or
We're
going to be in
gonna
the
put that
works?
together. It just came through and talking with Geraldine, and we're gonna figure out, I've gotta figure out a time and who are we gonna do this with? It's difficult to do it with the whole board together, to have them come here and speak to the whole board. It's a meeting. We can do it that way, or we can have the state, we could figure out if the state can come and meet with us in the evening or during the day. Do you want to put, you're on the EMS liaison, so that would make sense that you were there. Do you want another person to be in on that meeting to meet with the state and who that might be?
That would be a huge education for us. I think we should take advantage of it and have a special meeting.
I would.
Or make it part of an agenda, not November 1st meeting. But there is some urgency to
Yeah, and
this,
that was
so-
my question actually related to that correspondence and this application. What is the urgency of us submitting potentially a letter of support for the application? Is it, is it time critical, or can it wait until we've had a conversation? And I go back to our last series of conversations on ambulance services. I've said a lot. I think Jason has said, Jennifer said, it's about having information to make informed decisions. And I don't claim to be an expert on EMS, although I know a lot more now than I did before this whole process. I think we all do. So my instinct is, of course, my instinct would be, well, of course we want to be supportive of the application, but I'd be much more comfortable if we were able to have a conversation beforehand so we can really make an informed and strong, recommendation from the town, rather than just sort of a stock letter saying we support this. And I go back to the same things we've been saying all along. It's about having enough information, and I don't know what the time-sensitive nature is of this, and that's my
Right, so
question.
could we
Yeah.
ask Geraldine to come up?
So we can, so I would find from the board, are you looking for a special meeting inviting the state to come to discuss this here in town in the evening? Is that what you'd be looking for?
With the volunteers, with the ambulance associations involved as well.
That's okay, but
I agree with
I think
Mike.
if that's
I'd like
feasible.
to really understand what we're doing, and I'm not quite clear. I think I know, but I'm not sure, and I'd really like to be sure about what we're doing before I write letters to.
I think, you know, we've had a number of meetings, like Mike said, and it all keeps coming back to needing information to make informed decisions. And I don't think that, I mean, just as 2 weeks ago, I didn't believe I had enough information to make decisions on the topics we were discussing then, I don't believe, I'm in the same place today with respect to this application. And, you know, I think I said at the last meeting, we should evaluate the applications pending, the ones from SAA, the one from Danbury Ambulance, determine whether the town wants to take a position on any of them. So I think we should learn more about the application. I think I would like to hear again from Geraldine as to her plan, because I understand, as I understand it, this is an upgrade where they're going to invest about 80 grand, I guess, up front. They're going to have a paramedic in town during certain hours, or maybe 24 hours, I don't remember, on the ambulance, but it's not really, it doesn't replace our current system in any way. Like we have, it doesn't, we still have the Campion system. What I'm interested in is what the next steps are, because Southbury Ambulance has indicated that they have more of a longer-term plan to advance this forward, and this is sort of the first step. So I'd kind of like to understand the connections there and how they relate to one another. And then, you know, I still want to understand, and this goes back to the meetings we've been having, you know, at our last meeting, I heard, based on the discussion, that there's at least 3 ways to provide this service. There may be more. One is the intercept service, which we have. One is a fly car, and one is actually having, you know, paramedics on the ambulances. And I thought I heard, and, you know, I'd like to hear from Geraldine on this, last time that there was some agreement between the various providers that the fly car was actually the preferred of those methods. So I'd also like to explore if we're proceeding, you know, if Southbury Ambulance is proceeding with this, you know, and then they have a few-year plan to get up to something else. In the interim, I think we should be looking at, if we believe that the best alternative, and this is a discussion with the state as well, is a fly car to have a paramedic in town 24/7 in the backup. We should start determining what the cost of that is and whether we should be moving from the Campion service to that, so that we can do that. That's not to replace what, as I understand it, that wouldn't replace anything that Geraldine's doing here, because it'd be the same thing, and she would, and then we hear from her as to what the next steps are. So those are sort of my questions and thoughts about the topic.
okay. Gerald, if you're here?
She's here.
What's missing, Jeff?
It's becoming a regular,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, nice to see you all again.
Hey,
Geraldine
somebody
White,
had a
Service
call.
Chief, Southbury Ambulance. So fly car and intercept are the same thing.
Right, but I thought that at least someone had said at the last meeting that you can have a fly car in town.
Yes.
As opposed to an intercept from
It
Waterbury.
could still be an intercept.
Okay,
So that's the advantage of the fly car. So George had asked what my preference is, and our preference is the fly car. Because a fly car can go, assist the crew, maybe not be not needed, downgrade. They could meet an ambulance en route. But right now, I'm forced to do the embedded because of the expense.
and is your preference the fly car as we currently, I mean, is that what we currently have, fly car, but it's, but.
Yes.
Right. Is your
Right.
preference to have it the way we currently have it, or to actually have a fly car in town, which I think was one of the proposals we had last year when we.
Okay,
looked
so
at
it's the same thing. A fly car intercept is the same thing. The difference would be a fly car being in Southbury versus coming from Campions.
That's what I'm asking.
Right.
So would your preference be that the fly car be in Southbury?
Well, I'm going to stand by the committee that recommended that we continue with the Campions program because of the cost and the expense. But as a beginning start for the town to have their own medic, Southbury Ambulance has applied for what they call an MIC upgrade. Okay, so that would be Southbury Ambulance would have a medic as part of one of their crews. So during the day, I have 2 crews. I would only have 1 medic. That medic would be part of 1 crew. So of course, the goal would be if a call came in for a sore throat, you send the BLS crew, because that's not really an ALS. So then your medic stays behind to go with the second person as part of the second crew. And that's the goal here is to build, towards having the fly car, because the fly car obviously is another expense. It's another entire employee. So you would still have your 2 crews, which are 4 people, and then you would have, for the fly car intercept, you would have the vehicle and another employee in that car. So I'm trying to take what we pay, we're paying at least 1 person for one of our shifts during the week. So it would be the increase between the EMT and the paramedic. That's our investment. So it's to be able to build up.
So the building up part.
Right.
What's your time frame? And at the end of the day, when you've built up to your ideal situation, is that ideal situation a fly car medic within the boundaries of the town of Southbury?
24/7.
24/7?
Yes.
Okay. So
3 years is our guess
3
right
years.
now.
So you want to upgrade your service now.
Right.
Start the upgrade.
Yes.
Have a medic with your crew. You
Yes.
want to go through a process. You have a plan. I guess we'd want to. I'm not sure if we've seen a lot of stuff. I'm not sure if we've seen that plan or not. So the 3-year plan, the long-term plan to get from that point to the point where you're providing 24/7 paramedic coverage in town through a fly car. At that point in time, does that replace the Campion or whatever other contract the town has?
Yes.
Okay. So that path is one path, and while that path is going on, while we're gearing up to those 3 years, if Southbury Ambulance is determining that this is a good thing to do, right?
Yes.
You want to do it, and you want to have a fly car medic in town 24/7.
Correct.
Right? Okay. So I think putting that, we could do both, right? The town could support that, but I think we really should be looking at the cost of having a fly car medic 24/7 in the town now. Shouldn't we?
Not wait 3 years.
Right. And then in 3 years, we replace that. Instead of replacing the Campion contract, we replace that contract, depending on what that is. Now, I understand the EMS committee's recommendation last time. It was like over a year ago, because there was a bid issue.
Right.
Essentially. And the other bid we got that's what they offered essentially, but they added stuff after, whatever happened. There was an issue with the bid. So of the bids that could be accepted, it was Campion. But if the cost differential is similar to what those bids were a year ago, would the preferred method be to have a fly car in town?
24/7.
24/7.
Right, and that would be, the caveat there is that would be 1 medic. Right now, we're getting 3. And as I pointed out in one of the last meetings, that if you just take a simple hourly medic at $30 an hour, 24/7, it's $306,000. We're paying less than that for 3 medics.
But I'm just saying, similar to the contract we have now, which is a paramedic and a backup. From there, you have other backup paramedics available through Danbury. I think you have one now or something.
But if we had that similar contract saying paramedic, fly car, in town 24/7 with a backup should they be out on a call, would that would be 24/7, 365 fly car paramedic in town with a part of the contract with a backup available. Now, that doesn't mean living in town, but available. Is that better for the people of the town, for the people that we're surveying? I mean, take away from the cost. We don't know what the cost is, but I mean, when we say fly car paramedic in town, of course we'd have to have some kind of a backup. I think that was the issue with.
That was the whole issue with that other bid last time.
Correct, that was one of the issues, right, right.
I mean, that was a significant issue as to whether or not it included the backup, and then they said.
So the contract would be for a backup.
Right.
So you were saying
So I'm sure that it kind of answered Jeff's question. There's a complexity here with the 3 different PSAs. So right now the town has one contract to cover all 3 PSAs with Campion. So, I don't always know how the state would rule on that, I'll be very honest, because they're not consistent.
Well, the only thing is with a fly car, we're currently supplying a fly car paramedic.
For all 3.
For all 3.
Right.
The change would be that paramedic would be based in town on a fly car 24/7 and a backup available for that fly car should they be called out and another one is needed. So I don't think the state should have a problem with that because we're already currently providing to all 3 services and all 3 PSAs, right? We're doing it now and we would continue to provide it because I think we still need to provide paramedic to 2 other services no matter what we need. We can't say, well, I've just.
What you're saying, Jeff, it makes logic sense to me. And I would say that Campions or whoever has to go out to bid would most definitely provide the backup. We would be required to have backup mutual aid anyhow, but like we have mutual aid for BLS, it may be worded as mutual aid now, not
backup.
Not backup.
I know there's times that you actually do go out to mutual aid beyond our borders. Because
absolutely.
It does occur. It certainly does.
Mutual is mutual.
Yeah.
You've mentioned a bunch of times, Geraldine, over the last month or so, the crawl, walk, run plan. Could you, I don't want to put you too on the spot, but I'm going to. Could you, in a succinct way, sort of outline the crawl, which is this first step you've talked about?
Right.
Which is this step that you're applying for? The walk and the run. The run is we're 3 years from now. You guys have a fly car in town. Does that plan require SAA to get any different? Do you have any other applications you'd need to file to take that path forward?
Okay, so the crawl was the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, evaluating it in 90 days to bring it up to Monday through Friday, 6 to 6, and then expand it to the PM shift, expand it to the 7 days around the clock, over the course of probably a couple of years. The state says it's 24/7. So if I would have a difficulty with the 24/7, we have to work that out with Campions, and that's why I'm saying that we still need the Campions right now, because I really need the crawl, walk, run. I really need to come in, build it, evaluate, keep your Q&A going, maintain, the good service that we provide, with all these new things. We don't want to have any hinge pins. We want this to go, smooth and continue to serve well. So, that's another reason why the crawl, walk, run. And the other part is financial. It takes a year to get paid for some of these calls, sometimes longer. So, we're laying it out and hoping that, we're dealing with a lot of Medicare and Medicaid. It's just the way that it is. We have an elderly community. So it takes sometimes a year to get paid.
Do you have any idea of what that amount, I mean, you talk about that, I would assume it's not all the calls in the 1 year. How much that carryover is on that 1 year? Like, if you had 100 calls and it was, I'm just numbers, 100 calls, $100,000, 10% go over a year, that's $10,000. And I'm just wondering what that carryover is on that number.
Well, Medicare and Medicaid is the worst because
surprising.
It's, they rule the roost on insurance, so they set the precedents, and the percentages based, let's see, I don't want to say this politically correct. We have an elderly community, so we have a high number of Medicare and Medicaid. So
the interesting thing is
did that answer your question without me screwing myself into the ground?
So yours is going to be more volume than it is going to be.
The interesting thing is that the hospital said they actually like Southbury customers because they pay. Right. So
I want to bring us back to actually the original reason we called Geraldine up, which is the time-sensitive nature of your current application that's in and the request for us to write a letter of support.
Do you have a public hearing date?
Right.
We don't have a public hearing for this. This is approved by the regional coordinator, and then goes to the director. So, and I'll even back up to say, when the state comes in here to talk with all of us, their emphasis is going to be the responsibilities that we all have, and to engage us to work together. So they're going to talk about the statute, about the EMS plan, which ours is due in January 2019, and how we have to play nice in the sandbox. The rest of it's for us to work out.
So my other question I think I have is, how significant do you think the numbers will change between now in the next 2 years that will make you go to full-time?
I don't know, and that's why we want to evaluate it every 90 days. This is a new adventure, but obviously it's an adventure that, people came forth during the contract time from Danbury, that, there were people that felt that having a Medicare was important. It's been on Southbury Ambulance's strategy plan for years. We're a little behind on getting it kicked off, but during all that time became a reality to my board. It's like, okay, well, let's move forward, and that's that's how we got here, where we are today.
So this opportunity affords you a soft launch, because
Yes.
we have the protection
Yes.
of the intercept with Campion right now.
And I think the concern is, okay, so Southbury Ambulance goes on the call, we bill for that, the town's paying for Campions. We have to sit down with Campions, and we have to say, okay, you're not gonna be here primary for Southbury as much as you were.
Right, their call volume.
Okay, so your call volume for Southbury should go down a little. Let's talk this out. Let's reevaluate the numbers. I mean, we're dealing with reasonable people.
Does that reduce their costs or
Yes, it will
increase
reduce
them?
your costs.
It will, yeah.
Yes.
So I have a question for Jeff Tinley while he's here. Just in theory, what does the would the Board of Selectmen, in the first Selectman's office, writing a letter, submitting a letter of support, are there any potential liability issues there? Should the town get it and something happen? Should SAA be granted the upgrade and something happens, does it put the town at any further risk by saying, well, we were behind this too? Okay. Thank you.
So my other thing is if financially, when you go to do this for 90 days, I would think that we could extract the calls Southbury Ambulance made from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We know that how many calls, what the reimbursement was from those calls, and you should be able to mathematically figure out what that number would be. And
We
know
talking
what-
BLS calls or ALS
ALS.
calls? ALS calls.
So our paramedic shows, as we have that billing there, you should be able, so you should be able to take it from 6 to 6 and say, okay, now we may be paying Campion, but you could also look at that 6 to 6 and say, this number of calls, the paramedic at this cost, and you should be able to formulate whether that reimbursement for those calls would cover that paramedic. You understand what I'm saying? What I'm getting at?
I don't know.
So from 6 to 6, you have 100 calls. And we know what the reimbursement is for those 100 calls, say, what we know what the reimbursement is, we also know that some of the calls are not paid for, or they're not getting right away, or you haven't had that come in. We can do that. And then we would know that number of reimbursement for the ALS. And you'll also know, okay, you should be able to see, okay, so it costs for the paramedic that is being hired in at what, I think you said $38
$30 an hour.
Well, I use $30 an hour.
So let's say $38, $40 an hour. You should be able to back that number to determine financially what the impact is to this Southbury ambulance, should that be taken over.
So the cost to the town right now, Southbury Ambulance is paying the town $7,000, $8,000 a month. Last year, it was $113,000. So you take the $113,000, quickly divide it by 12, and that's the number of people that are paying each month. And of course, there's aged history, so there's money that's owed. I think the last month and two was around 120 ALS calls.
During which time?
September and.
What time of day?
Well, I don't know. This was for the whole month. So we would have to, you're right, we would have to extract the 6 to 6 or the 9 to 5, whatever we wanted, whatever times that we wanted to extract. But you still don't know the monies that you're going to get, because you don't know if it's going to be a Medicaid call or it's going to be a full insurance. Okay, in Medicaid, you can barely get to the hospital and back.
Right, we could potentially though, and this is why I think your crawl process of looking at it 90 days, you could dig into the calls.
Yes.
And start looking at, was it a Medicaid call, was it this call, and we really could do that analysis. I think that makes sense. I think that it's important here that, unless I'm mistaken, that the financial liability in this process is on SAA. Is on SAA. If after 90 days, 180 days, SAA can't see a path to it not being a loser, a financial loser, we're in the same exact situation we are now. You could decide that you're no longer going to do it. We have the campaign contract in place. I think there's going to be a period of time where we wouldn't yet go in and renegotiate a campaign contract. We would leave it as is to see how it's going, and and once you'd come back to the town with some analysis, then we decide whether or not it made sense to have a conversation with them. Right. I think the big thing here is, we don't want to change the public safety dynamic, and we know what we have right now. So I think it's important that the financial risk here is on SAA.
Well, there is going to be a change in revenue that the town gets from not billing for calls during that time. So we can't ignore that either, and I think we need to know what that number is before we make a decision, because,
So based on, based on the last year, can you put together the data of the number of ALS calls, the number you would have responded to in this manner, and the reduction of revenue to the town?
And
that's the cost. So there's no cost. There's no cost.
Right.
But there's
loss of revenue.
Opportunity.
There's no cost of us putting out money, but there's less money that will be coming in as reimbursement. Right.
Right.
Okay. So how can we determine what that number is?
And it depends on when the call comes, if it comes the first call or the second call. If it's,
Well, you have that, you should have that, you should have
Well,
that.
well, yeah, and it depends on the payer, if it's Medicaid, Medicare. I mean, so we could take, you know, an average number of calls that Campions came here, and dispatch could provide you with that.
Well, we're asking, I think
Monday through Friday, how many times did Campions come in here from 6 AM to 6 PM?
well, I think that's what Jason is asking, is can you
Right.
get that data for us so that during the time period you're asking for, I think it's 6 to 6?
Yes.
That's my understanding, 6 to 6. If you could get that data of the calls during that time period, and you're saying Monday through Friday.
Right.
So that we know what that number is, and we can.
And recognizing it's a best guess estimate, given a
Approximate,
lot
yeah,
of
right, we're not-
variables.
right,
Yeah.
Well,
It's not gonna be more than we're getting, right? So we're not losing money on this deal.
A finance expert should be able to look at this. I
Actually.
am not one, and put together a financial model
We could lose money on
based
this.
on, put together a financial model based on the past year's data that we have. They should be able to do some modeling.
It's all gonna hinge on what,
To Jason's point, it's, you know, and we've talked about this. It's a fiscal analysis that,
George?
you know, of this specific thing.
it's all gonna hinge on what Campion decides to cut their rate by if Geraldine picks up a lot of those calls. Because if they hold the rate the same, the 289 or whatever it is, $1,000, and Geraldine picks up a lot of those calls, then we don't get as big a reimbursement from, so we end up spending more money is what'll happen. That's what concerns me a little bit.
Trust me, Campions will work with the town of South.
I think they will. I'm not saying they won't.
Right.
I'm
They've
just,
supported your
It's just
application.
gonna-
but that's where
Right?
it's gonna hinge
Excuse me?
right
Right, don't
there.
they support your application? There's some.
They do,
Yes.
yes. And they support the town of Southbury. They liked doing business with the town of Southbury.
But also bear in mind that Trinity Healthcare is buying Campion Ambulance, which means there's gonna be a change, and you don't know how that,
That might change everything.
it's gonna be different Bill Campion is not gonna be running
Yes,
that
he is.
company. Yep, he may be, but it will be Trinity.
Right.
It's Trinity. It may be managing it, he may be running it, but it
Yeah,
could
that's
change.
still not out there in the news yet, by the way.
Okay,
Right.
but if I
I
could
read
be
a
so
single story
bold
about it.
as to say, we're obviously not making a decision tonight.
No.
We're going to have the meeting so that we can get more
to-
educated, because we don't have enough
So
education.
I think we're gonna have to,
We
we're
need
gonna
the
do this.
financial analysis as well,
Well,
right?
right, how urgent is the desire for the letter of support? If we're not gonna have this financial analysis done in 2 weeks either, by the way. So, and you don't know a timeline in terms of when they might rule, all right? The assumption is the sooner the better, but is there sort of a deadline for us to say
I don't think there's
we're
a
comfortable doing it or not?
deadline, because there's no
And
public hearing.
The reason I asked Jeff the question about any liability that we face to doing it, the risk for us is low, supporting it either, you know, if we did support it. There's not risk in supporting it.
We've got a couple of pretty high-powered financial people working for the town right now. I think we could probably get an analysis pretty quickly from them.
Well, if we get some
Jeff?
new people on,
It
Jeff.
looks like Mr. Tinley has something to say.
I mean, if I want to just give an overall assessment of what I'm hearing and what we've gone through for the past number of weeks, I think what Geraldine said about the state wanting us to play well together in the sandbox, I think that's a message we're being sent. And I would agree that what the State Department of Public Health will do after any kind of a contested public hearing, or what they'll do on any application, she used the word inconsistent. I would say it's unpredictable, perhaps. But I do think that if we do, all of the directly interested stakeholders within town, if we do work together and we do come up with a plan that all of them support, that the chances that the State Department of Public Health will support that, will agree with it, are greatly enhanced. And so I think that what we're seeing is a situation where nothing's happening right now. Even the Danbury ambulance application hearing has now been continued into November. I think the state, if I'm reading this right, is sending us a message: get your act together, work together, and we can work all of this out, and that, to me, makes a lot of sense.
So what I'm hearing is you'd like to do a special meeting.
We don't have enough meetings, Jeff. We need to have more special meetings.
Well, let's talk about this. I mean, that's interesting. You know, I appreciate that perspective. You know, with that, you know, and knowing that in terms of any potential liability, there is none. Really, Jeff, you know, Jeff doesn't think there is none. What is the downside of supporting this application right now?
It's a financial risk that we end up spending more money and getting essentially the same coverage is the downside, I think.
There is a financial issue. We do have a 90-day out provision in the Campion contract. I would like to see a discussion started with Campion now about this, so that if this is implemented, we can at the same time have a reduction in the cost to the town under that contract, either voluntarily or by giving notice of the termination to force the issue.
Okay, that's good.
And I also think we need to, and this is from a public safety perspective, is what I'm saying here. If it's determined that, let's say it's $280,000 for the contract, and let's say the loss of revenue is $80,000, you're at $360,000. If we went out to bid for a paramedic, fly car in town, staying here 24/7, would we be able to do that with that amount of money? Will it give a better service to the people in town, that we wouldn't have a fly car, instead of 5 days a week, we would have 7 days a week. Instead of 12 hours a day, it'd be 24. Is that possible?
Wasn't that, Jeff, the RFP you just sent out a month ago for that kind of coverage? I didn't fully read it and understand it, but.
And Vintech replied to that. I'd like to go back out and look at an RFP with that, with 2 different models.
But you were thinking that because of all the controversy and whatnot, that maybe that deterred some from bidding it. All right.
But I'm just concerned, I'm just looking at from the public safety side. And if it was gonna, let's say, all right, loss of revenue, what we're paying for the contract is $360,000, and we determined the contracts come in, and they said, okay, total contract all in a bid of, I'm not saying it would, but let's say $400,000. Are we willing to spend the extra $40,000 on the $360,000 to give 24/7, $365,000 to the people in the town of Southbury? There is a cost to public safety, whether it's buying a new fire truck that we need for the fire department, or whether it's we need to have our police officers hired. It costs money. Is that value of that additional cost give our citizens full coverage around the clock? Is that important?
Well, it's important. I think we need
to. Yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I started the discussion. I'd like to know what that number is. I think we should be issuing an RFP, and we should work with the EMS committee in reviewing it and whatnot to issue an RFP for, you know, whatever it's called, like a fly car in town 24/7 with a backup, like, you know, the various things are required, and see what that shows, and determine the numbers from Geraldine based on the discussion we just had. Meet with the state and evaluate, once we have all of the information, the best way to proceed.
So my office will be, we'll put out a RFP for fly car in town 24/7 with a backup paramedic available through the contract, not in town, but a backup company.
And I mean, I think we should, you know, to Jeff Tinley's point, what Geraldine said about what the state said, whatnot, I think that we should work on that, or we should put a draft together and then work on a final draft with the EMS committee, get their input. They did the last RFP solicited the Campion offer and the Danbury ambulance offer. And so, because I saw things in there that were different than the things in the RFP the town issued a couple weeks ago. I think it does make sense to have them involved in putting that together, assisting at least with that and providing input, so that what it is we're asking for pricing on is what we actually want.
I think we all agree on the general description of what we want. We just want to get the wording exactly right, so everybody in that community understands what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about the money and the expense. We also have to be concerned about patient care and what's right for the people. I mean, the government has to make sure that our emergency services are properly run. So we can't always put it's like recycling. We know the right thing financially is to stop recycling, but
so sure
nobody is going to sit here and say we shouldn't for the environment, because we have a responsibility to help save our environment and for our futures. So this is the same thing. There's a price. What is that price worth, and what's best for the community at large?
Yeah, I mean, I think we at least need to know what that is, acknowledging that. I mean, this request just came in. I think we need to, analyze it before we provide a response. But I mean, I've read all the materials with the application and from the state, and I believe the state, based on the last email or whatever, deemed the application complete. They were, this item. I don't think we're holding anybody up by not writing a letter of support tonight, based on the emails I saw from the state, because that item about needing a recommendation from the town of Southbury was removed from the final communication from the state based on your explanation to them.
Right, correct. And if you remember right, we came here in May. So the request was really in May when we made our presentation.
It's taken us that long to get up to speed to figure this out to any point where we can make a rational decision, I think.
So
I don't think we need to reopen the discussions that have been had over the last few meetings as to where we're at.
Agreed.
I would like to, Geraldine, if you could reach, you said could you reach out to the people at OEMS? You seem to get a quicker, better response than I do up at that place up there.
The Gold Dome.
And I think what I would be saying is that if there's a time that they could come down here in the evening, we will create a special meeting to have them here just to discuss with them, just a special meeting, so we don't get bogged down, because that could take as long as this whole meeting now, frankly.
It's still not over.
Yeah. It'll get over.
You said that out loud.
Yes, I'll be more than glad to. So,
that's kind of why I held off till now, to get this discussion going.
Okay.
All right?
Yep.
So I'll wait to hear from you. You'll contact them, and we'll put together the meeting here, and we'll have a special meeting in the evening at some time we can fit in our schedule, but I don't know what their schedule looks like.
One last point. There was also an email exchange about having Bob Holdsworth potentially come and talk to us about that plan. Should we put that on hold? Or should we have that happen?
I think in many ways that may be more informative than the meeting with the state.
Okay.
I mean, the state's going to give us, I don't know, statutory requirements and whatnot. And,
that's exactly what they're going to do.
They're not, I almost think that the state is...
Easy.
No. I'm not sure that the discussion with the state is going to be as extensive and lengthy as, we're talking. I think a meeting with Holdsworth would be probably far more involved, and, if he would be willing to come, would be.
I also think the meeting with the state is to Jeff's point, is a literal demonstration of our
Cohesion.
desire to show that we're in this together.
Yeah.
And that our goal is to come up with a mutually beneficial resolution that puts the public safety of our residents at the
That's the
at the
first
front.
thing we have to.
So-
And I think we all share that too, and I think that there's even just making the request for that meeting, I think delivers a message too, so.
Mike, I disagree with you a little bit, sorry.
Okay.
Because
Wouldn't be the first.
true. But we balance each other. Thank you for that. I do agree that Bob Holdsworth would be more productive, okay? The state is gonna come in to say, the town has to have a part, the town has a part in EMS, and the EMS organizations have a part in EMS, and we need to play nice in the sandbox. We just, the statute says we have to have this EMS plan, and we have to live by it. So, and that's exactly what they told me when I called. This is what they're gonna come in and talk about. But, if you want the state to come in, we'll have the state come in. I don't have an issue with that. The proof in the pudding's gonna be that, all this craziness has, simmered down for the most part. We're having two-way conversations. We're asking each other for information, and we're making a commitment to move forward. So I would rather see Bob Holdsworth come in if he would, because that is, I think, your board's bigger question here, if that 2013.
I think we should do both, and in general, that was your recommendation.
Fine, right,
It was your recommendation
Well,
for us to meet with the
right.
state. So, we concur with that. I
Right.
think we should do both. I think we should do both, and I agree, I think the one with Holdsworth is the more important one in terms of our knowledge base. But I think there are reasons to do,
I think the Holdsworth one will get to a lot of these questions we've been asking.
Yes.
And
Okay, good. So set both of those meetings
Thank
up.
you.
So you want me to set up the
Jennifer
Bob
doesn't
Holdsworth?
have
meeting?
to.
Yeah, we'll do the special meeting,
Going on
we'll have
3
both here,
hours.
that's
If we
fine.
could do it the same day, that'd be great.
That'd be awesome.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it could be at the same.
thank you.
okay. Thank you,
Very, very
Gerald.
much, Geraldine, for your continued patience.
Okay. Any new business? I don't.
Well, I'm just kidding.
That's up to you. We can do all, listen, I technically don't have to come to work tomorrow.
Humor.
Okay, we'll move on to First Selectmen's report. Work has started back on the Spruce Brook Road Bridge project. I stopped by there today, and John has gone over that. Just so you know, I don't know if you've seen it on our Facebook page and whatnot. There was a sewage spill at, over at Heritage on the golf course. We should have more information on any concerns or remedies. I've reached out to DEP. I would say they were as helpful as they could be. I won't say any more. But I've also called Neil Lustig for the health department and he'll give me an email tomorrow, communications about, I've been out there, Pompanoag River Watershed Coalition has been out there. Walking, we don't see any debris or anything, they've cleaned it up. The general idea is that someone said it happens all the time, and dilution is the solution. There's a lot of water running, there's no evidence in the stream or in the pond. Connecticut Water had notified me, there is state statute that says you have to now, but it doesn't seem to be a big impact.
Was it a broken pipe? Or?
It was mechanical failure, and as the health department said, that happens from time to time. And it is, the more of these types of, systems are online. So anyway, we're on top of it. Connecticut Water, Heritage Water, but it is Connecticut Water, was very good about it, and so it should be under control. Also, the town has been granted intervenor status on Danbury ambulance application, which you heard is going to be continued to November 16th. There was a deadline for that. On Jeff Tinley's advice, if you need to file to have a seat at the table, kind of a neutral thing. We just want to make sure we have a seat at the table so we can speak to them. I have a seat at the table. Camping ambulance, like I said, may be purchased by St. Mary's Trinity. Is also on an intervenor with that.
application, and we're going on. Update oral interviews have been all day today, and they are tomorrow. It's encouraging. It's a long process for the people who are sitting in that room, and we're moving forward with that. The town will be installing GPS in town vehicles in approximately 1 week. Some people have mentioned, they've watched the tutorial and said, geez, this might help with fleet management and finding efficiencies. That should, we'll be doing that. So that's my.
Who's monitoring that to see if we can find efficiencies? Is that Ray? Is that John?
Well, we'll all be able to look at, but
okay.
it's so essentially what happens is if you're looking at when a vehicle needs to be, well, if you need an oil change or you need mileage, it could be tied in and.
Yeah, no, I get the whole concept of it. It's great.
Public Works.
Okay.
You know, all right.
Could I add to your selectmen's report? The Board of Finance has asked that we, right now the Board of Finance is undergoing review of the bid policy, and some of the changes made have to deal with the thresholds and sign-offs from department heads, and they've been increased. They're going to tweak the plan and get us their suggested the policy and get it to us in a couple of months. But John Michaels was clear to state that he wanted us to, what did he say? That we could be working to create on-call lists of trades. It was a good idea that right now we have an on-call list for engineers. Engineers?
We have on-call engineers, but we still go out to bid for their services through the on-call engineers. So it's a short list that we put out, but we're still going out to bid. It's not like we're awarding to them based on. So that's still not quite as, you know, there's times like, geez, I'd like to get this done. I'd like to just call them and get this done, but you have to go out.
It's not as simple as it sounds. So but they're working on it. They wanted us to start, well, John Michaels wanted us to start looking into doing that process because it could be time consuming. But the other thing was the P card program. They're going to switch the debit card situation.
We're looking to go from a debit card to a P card. And you know, it's a purchasing card. We're looking to do that. The debit cards are a little more risky, and we actually found one account that had almost $1,160,000 tied to a debit card. And at risk, you were there.
I was there.
So that money's been moved, and to protect the money, it wasn't insured. So.
At that same meeting, though, beyond just John making that suggestion he suggested we not wait on some of the, and Cindy, you were there too, didn't he suggest that we not wait on changing the threshold on some of them?
Yeah, he said that initially, but he changed his mind.
Yeah, so they're working on that.
The more important thing really is for us to start thinking about getting a P card.
Okay.
Last thing they talked about was charter revision recommendations, and what they were talking about was the what did they call them? The non-fiscal matters, the compliance of them, and is there any oversight of them? And they started to really talk about it, and then I think they kind of pulled back and realized, well, that's not numbers, so we really shouldn't probably be talking about it. But they were suggesting that maybe we should, as a board, be looking at we should be recommending to the Charter Revision Commission that there should be some kind of compliance mechanism for non-fiscal matters. That's it.
So nice.
Anything else, Michael, that was there?
Was that?
So nice of them to be giving us work to do.
Looking out for us.
And that's a little, the compliance matters, that's gonna be that's gonna be difficult.
Just saying, just relaying the information.
Who does it? I think we do have people who are responsible for compliance. I think that has to do with thresholds of the financial officer, the first selectman. I think that's kind of a lot of the compliance as far as how people do what they're supposed to do. And I think steps will be, you will see steps in place with this new financial officer to make sure that those are complied with, such as purchase orders, how they're done and how they're executed, and supporting documents on that purchase order, things of this nature. I think you'll see more of that. I can tell you, I will want to see more of it going forward. So then that compliance will be in. It really has to do, you can look at it once in a while and say, the board can look at it, the Board of Finance, and say, have we been complying with this policy, with this? So I don't think it's an oversight thing. That's a little cumbersome to do all that. Okay, reports from liaisons. George?
Road study, I think we heard everything we need to hear from John. IT committee, there is a meeting next week scheduled with the Board of Finance. I think 2 people will be there, John Michaels and John Riley, I believe. And that's going to delve into cybersecurity issues more deeply. Region 15, nothing new there, and streetscape lights. I have nothing to say on that. It's kind of in your hands, Jeff, so that's it for me.
Economic development was supposed to meet last night. They did not have a quorum. IPOC doesn't meet again until later November, I believe. The Committee for Town-Owned Properties has reached out about a replacement for Planning Commission member, but one has not been appointed yet.
Okay. Jason?
LEPC didn't meet. Library met last week. The improvements to the entrance are underway. They're looking at, I think, over the next few weeks, I think it should be completed, and they got to do their lighting and stuff. Longtime library board member Sherman London is no longer on the library board. They said farewell to him on the last meeting. We had cookies. They welcomed Chris Tolley, their newest member. They're working with Gosha and looking at vendors for updating their website. Their annual volunteer luncheon is tomorrow. And they started a preliminary review of their budget at the meeting. They'll be diving into it further at the next meeting. So more on that. That's it.
Planning met, and farmers market was pronounced a success despite the rainy Thursdays.
Oh, those poor farmers. I mean, it was like every Thursday.
Yeah, but Dolores is going to be applying for a grant for next year's farmers market. There was some discussion once again around the town's liability for accepting properties without physically inspecting them. So after much discussion, I think the consensus was that the commissioners suggested added language of including a physical inspection to administrative requirements when referring 824 referrals to this board for purchase. Let's see, Planning Commission, excuse me, I'm wearing out here, is currently seeking qualified bids to perform a pedestrian safety study down Main Street. They've gotten 10 responses so far, and it doesn't close till November. Thank you so much. Doesn't close until November 15th. Senior Commission met. You guys all had the director's report. I won't go through that, but I did want to point out that Tamith continues to seek additional education, and she just achieved some credits in grief counseling. So kudos to her. I did inform the commission yesterday that I will not be able to be the liaison to the Senior Commission next year because the daytime meetings are too difficult with my schedule. So I would ask that someone else who is available to do that could do that. And lastly, you heard the strategic plan, and we really would like to get your questions ASAP. Thanks.
We can all, the reason they were meeting during the day, there were some people who were having trouble driving at night, so let's maybe ask them.
They all don't like to drive at night, and they moved it from 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon for me so I could go, but anyway.
Let's see what we can do.
There you go.
So none of those commissions met since last meeting. Parks and Rec meets next Thursday, the Board of Ed on October 22nd, and EMS on December 12th. So if we're looking in terms of EMS and putting something together in front of them, and we're at that point, we have a month and a half to talk, other plans.
I would, any other business? I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss the draft MOU between the town of Southbury, Middlebury, and Region 15 on security measures involving the regional schools, inviting Jeff Tinley and Cindy Harrison into the meeting. Have a motion?
Before we make that motion, can I make a motion to add that item to the agenda under executive session?
Second.
Okay. Any second, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll make the motion Jeff just read.
I'll second that motion that Jason just made.
And the caveat would be it'd be a brief meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we're in executive session. Thank you.
I didn't see anything under it. I was like, oh. It's one of those just